Good evening, everybody, and welcome. May I remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the internet and the recorded archived for future viewing. And with that, we move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies? Councillor Moore?
Yeah, Councillor Ann Moore and Councillor Rhiannon Booch.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2, A and B, to hear the roll call of members and to receive declarations of interest under the Council's Code of Conduct.
Councillor Julie Aviat. Councillor Vincent Bailey. Councillor Jonathan Bird. Councillor Bronwyn Brooks. Councillor Liz Burnett. Councillor George Carroll. Councillor Christine Cave. Councillor Janice Charles.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Millie Collins. Councillor Jeff Cox. Councillor Robert Crowley. Councillor Pamela Drake. Councillor Vince Driscoll. Councillor Stuart Edwards. Councillor Ben Gray. Councillor Owen Griffiths. Councillor Stephen Griffiths. Councillor Tony Hampton. Councillor Sally Hanks. Councillor Nick Hodges. Councillor Hunter Jarvie. Councillor Gwyn John. Councillor Ian Johnson.
Advice from the Margin Officer with regards to the motion which is at item 5 as a member of the planning committee noting that a live application the planning application is currently taking place, and I've been informed that I should remind council and councillors that I will not be making my mind up on this matter at any point before the meeting takes place and that planning application.
Okay. Councillor Gordon Kemp.
Item 11A on employee pay policy. I have a dispensation from the Standards Committees to speak and vote.
Councillor Peter King. Thank you. Councillor Matthew Lloyd. Councillor Kevin Marnie. Councillor Catherine MacArthur. Councillor Neil Moore. Councillor Michael Morgan. Councillor Jane Norman. Councillor Rachel Nugent-Finn. Councillor Andrew Parker. Councillor Bob Penrose. Councillor Sandra Perks. Councillor Andrew Robertson. Councillor Leighton Rowlands.
Present, nothing to declare.
Councillor Ruba Sivanyanam. Councillor John Thomas. Councillor Neil Thomas. Councillor Steffan William.
Fy mod i yn lywodraethwr yn Ysgol Bro Morgannwg. So, with the exception of item 11D, because I'm an LEA Governor, Ysgol Bro Morgannwg, and any capital funding. Thank you.
Councillor Margaret Wilkinson. Thank you. Councillor Eddie Williams. Councillor Mark Wilson.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Margarita Wright.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of December 2017. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, to receive any announcements from the Mayor, which I do have a few. I'd just like to say, during this term of my office, I have attended civic functions, charity events and concerts, both inside and outside the Vale of Glamorgan. I was particularly delighted when I invited the Royal British Legion to the Mayor's Parlour and presented certificates to the many local businesses who did take part in the Poppy Appeal. I have been very pleased to honour and take part in equality and diversity events, including Holocaust Memorial Day, joining local schools for a show races and the Red Card workshop, and attending the Muslim Council of Wales Open Mosque Day. I also valued the opportunity to mark 100 years since the Representation of the People's Act was passed, an act that gave some women the right to vote for the very first time. Events like this and the celebration that we will be hosting on March the 8th for International Women's Day are significant in demonstrating the progress made in establishing equality across local politics, and I will continue work to promote that equality. I'd like to thank all our employees and my fellow councillors for joining me in marking the ceremony. I am pleased to announce that I have written to congratulate, on behalf of the members of this authority and the people of the Vale of Glamorgan, citizens who were awarded medals in Her Majesty the Queen's New Year Honour List, including Mr Brian Excel, MBE, and Mrs Catherine Clay, MBE. Finally, it gave me great pleasure and honour to meet His Royal Highness Prince Charles at Tea Haven Hospice. It was absolutely wonderful to witness at first hand what a happy, joyful and delightful place Tea Haven is. Fundraising for my charities has continued, and I would like to thank everyone who has supported the fundraising so far. Throughout my mayoral year, over 20 charities have benefited from fundraising opportunities and exposure. There are limited tickets available for my charity dinner dance, which takes place on the 23rd of March. Finally, may I wish you all a very happy St David's Day. Dydd Gwyl Dwi Hapus Bawb. Thank you all very much. Are there anybody with any petitions this evening? Councillor Nugent.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to present a petition on behalf of the residents of 14 Bastion Close. The petition is in relation to the establishment of a long-term issue relating to the boundary wall between 14 Bastion Close and Kes House. It's ultimately to establish responsibility over the ownership and to make the wall structure safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. We are now moving on to agenda item 5, but before we start this, can I bring Vicky, the monitoring officer, in, please, to give us some advice?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In relation to the notice of motion in respect of this evening's council agenda, that particular motion is specific to Natural Resources Wales's function. But with regard to the members of the Planning Committee going forward, the monitoring officer will be reminding them in due course, in light of the extensive commentary and public debate regarding the biomass plant in general, that when considering further applications which will come before the Planning Committee, of the need for them to be objective in their decision making, to declare any personal or prejudicial interests, not to have predetermined or to be biased with regard to the applications, and that only members that are objective in their consideration of such applications have no personal or prejudicial interests, have not predetermined or are not biased with regards to such applications may remain and take part in the debate and vote at subsequent planning committee meetings.
Thank you, Vicky. All clear? Agenda item 5 then is to consider the following notice of motion submitted by Councillors Bailey and Councillor Cave. Councillor Bailey? Sorry. Councillor Mahoney. I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Well, it's only a quickie. I'm delighted that people have had advice here.
Stand up, please. Can you stand up,
Oh,
please?
my apologies. I'm delighted that people have had advice here and have no complaint over that. I have to point out yet again that when I was in a similar situation and requested advice on the night, I was told in no uncertain terms that it was up to me to seek advice 48 hours in advance and there would be no advice given on the night. So whilst I don't have any problem with these members having advice here, let's have some consistency. I brought this subject up before. Either we have to have advice 48 hours before or we don't, but let's apply that even-handedly across the council. So I'm not going to go at you by any means. It's just bizarre. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahoney. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you. I just wish to make it clear for Councillor Marnie and anybody else listening that I requested this advice on Friday, and the advice that is being read out by the monitoring officer there is the same advice that was provided to me by email, and I think it is fair and appropriate for it to be read out on the night for clarity. However, I do appreciate and agree with your point that surely if you get your papers several days in advance and it says please contact the monitoring officer 48 hours in advance, then you should do so rather than consider there's issues on the night.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The motion was tabled because we want to establish a clear consensus in this chamber across all parties in all parts of the county and take this opportunity to speak with one voice on behalf of all residents. We've all heard the disappointing news that Natural Resources Wales are minded to grant the incinerator an environmental permit. But it is vital that we recognise that it is still possible to stop this worrying development from going ahead. Now, before I speak to the motion itself, I would like to take the unusual step of amending my own motion. Members of this council will be aware of recent developments, so I don't think there'll be too many surprises here. However, this does include, of course, the announcement recently by the Environment Minister that the Welsh Government is minded to issue a requirement for an environmental impact assessment. Most Barry members will also have had emails from residents concerning the proliferation of dust in the area as well, so the motion is also amended to include that, but I will read that in a moment. The amendments I speak, as I say, they are straightforward and they merely bring the motion up to speed with recent developments without fundamentally altering its tone. So I do hope that councillors will support the amended motion. Firstly, I wish to seek to insert a new paragraph 3 that the Vale of Glamorgan Council strongly urges the Minister for Environment to ensure that an environmental impact assessment accompanies the developer's planning application. The reason for this is simple: to stress our support as a council for this intervention by the Minister recently. In addition, the second and final change is merely to add to the final point, which would be now point 4, that in addition to NRW ensuring independent and robust monitoring should the application proceed, that they also investigate residents' concerns over the impact of dust from the site. The campaign against the Barry incinerator has clearly been driven by DIAG, and I pay tribute to them for their efforts. They've single-handedly undermined the idea that apathy rules in politics. It clearly doesn't. But we should also note the range of voices from all sides of the political divide, which have added pressure on the Welsh Government to stop this from happening. We've enjoyed the backing of the local MP and the local AM, both from different parties. Unanimous support from Barry Town Council working together to put politics aside and oppose this application. We've heard from regional AMs including Andrew Arty-Davis and Neil McAvoy, and indeed passionate representations from independent councillors in this very chamber, including Councillor Mahoney and many other members present here tonight. Council, tonight we have a chance to add this institution to that list and to send a message to the public in the gallery and at home that we speak for them. that we speak for the 10,000 people who signed a petition to stop this from happening. Opposing the incinerator has been one of my key priorities since being elected to this chamber, and for me the case is very clear. At the heart of this campaign is a genuine concern by all of us about the effect of the proposed plant and its effect on public health. We should all be very concerned about Natural Resources Wales' decision to grant a permit, and my colleague Councillor Cave will touch more on NRW and their part in this in due course. But what concerns me most is the fact that there has never been an environmental impact assessment on this application. The evidence against granting of a permit to biomass is overwhelming in my view, but too much of it has been provided by the applicants and too little has been focused on the very real risk to human health. There is also a significant aspect of EU law to consider, the precautionary principle, which places the burden of proof onto the applicant in such instances to demonstrate that there is no danger to human health and the environment. Are we satisfied that this has happened? And that's before we get to the many technical planning objections which have been raised and the fundamental question as to whether an incinerator would contradict the underlying principles of the Future Generations Act, which is after all the very piece of legislation that we're asked to consider in all that we do here as a council. The initial decision not to impose an environmental impact assessment was taken at planning stage by the Welsh Government, but the significant movement that they have made in recent weeks should be applauded. It is the result of considerable pressure placed by a constructive and passionate campaign by all of us. It should be taken as a clear sign that the campaign is far from over, that together we can still prevent this from happening. But there is a greater principle at stake here tonight. The public are looking to us to lead by example and to show them that we speak for them, that we are in touch and that we share their concerns. I sincerely hope that we will all rise to that challenge this evening, put party politics aside and back the motion before us.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. This is a procedural issue, so is everyone content that the motion is amended? Is everyone? Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. I just want to express concern and ask for clarification again from the monitoring officer, because the amendment that's been put forward by Councillor Bailey starts referring to the planning system. And the initial motion referred specifically to NRW. And the last thing that I want is that any member of this council finds themselves in a position where they are unable to vote on the motion, on the planning application when it comes to planning committee because of the way that this has been phrased or debated. So I'd like clarification again from the monitoring officer as to the impact of that amendment, because I wouldn't want this to change anything.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I have considered the matter and the same advice does apply. The issue for consideration is a matter of procedure and not of determination, so I'm perfectly content. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I second the motion. As you know, I'm not an expert in waste management, but you don't have to be an expert to see why the people of the Vale of Glamorgan have little faith in the ability of NRW or the Welsh Government to adequately monitor and control Aviva's experimental biomass gasification incinerator project. As far as I am aware, there are no processes in place to systematically monitor or record any of the adverse effects of the project, such as the breathing problems that people are currently facing since the arrival of the first load of waste wood, which has caused dust and debris to go into the air and adversely affect people's health already. We need a central recording system today that everyone is aware of and that can monitor what is happening on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis, so that we actually know what the ramifications are of this Aviva experiment. There must be in place better protections for the people of Barry and the rest of the Vale. As you know, I'm not a Barry councillor, but I'd like to take this opportunity to let the people of Barry know we fully support them. I would also like to personally thank the Dock Incinerator Action Group, DIAC, for all their efforts on behalf of everyone in the Vale of Glamorgan. I can't speak highly enough about their actions because, as it has already been pointed out today, there's often a lot said about apathy in the general public around matters such as this. And it gives me a great deal of pride, actually, to see that the people of Barry are prepared to put the time and effort in to stand up for their environment. So again, I'd like to thank you all. So I'd like to finally end by calling on everyone here tonight to back the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cave. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Plaid Cymru support this motion. I was elected last May for the Castellan ward, which includes Barry Docks and the waterfront, where this plant is, and I was elected to oppose this. In my first meeting here on the council, I asked the Vale Council leadership to change their views and to oppose the plans and push NRW to do the same. I was the only councillor to speak about biomass at that meeting last June. Tonight, many people want to speak. In my third meeting, I asked the council to investigate the planning process that saw it passed in 2015. And tonight, my fourth, I have a question about the options for the current application. I would like to thank the founding members of DIAG, former Plaid Cymru councillors Keith Stockdale, Barry Shaw, along with Paul Arnold and Max Wallace. Without them, DIAG, as it is today, would not have existed to fight the fight they have. We didn't want this in our backyard, and yet we have it. My residents were extremely let down by the 2015 decision of the Planning Committee to pass it, and now by NRW. The people of Barry have been ignored. We have this monstrosity, this blight on Barry. I hope that we're not stuck with it. I will continue to oppose this, but if it is there, then we must ensure that it is as safe as it can be. Thank you.
Councillor Stephen Willem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to echo what Councillor Collins has said with regards to this motion and further add my great disappointment with Natural Resources Wales. As a body, it has proven repeatedly that it lacks the capacity and the expertise to deal with issues within actually what is a shockingly unambitious remit. They don't have the expertise to spot glaring omissions, particularly in this biomass application, for example. Thankfully, members of DIAG did spot some of the omissions, and Councillor Hodges and myself were quick to act on that. But it shouldn't be down to members of the public to spot this. And what is sad is that once spotted, the lack of will and capacity in NRW to act on good information and in the interests of the people of this town and surrounding area. It is a body that is chronically underfunded. The staff survey shows how low morale is there and how little confidence the staff have in the way it is run. As I put it to their representative, who was most unfortunate to be cross-examined by me not once, but twice in successive economic and environmental development scrutiny meetings. I said to him that the organisation, by the sounds of it, is a shambles, that cannot monitor a fire in Llandaw, let alone proactively look after the interests of the people here when it comes to toxic radioactive waste from Hinkley Point. And now, finally, it has proven that it has fallen woefully short in the issue of this incinerator, which affects the good people of this town and the Vale. Now, as Councillor Collins has pointed out, I have to say this because it's all very nice that we've all come together now, cross-party, and finally supported what should have been supported 2 years ago, 3 years ago almost, when Councillor Nick Hodges at a planning meeting proposed to kill this dead. He was not supported then by members of Labour and the Conservatives. I'm glad to see that support is coming now. I hope it's not too little too late. Finally, we're getting an environmental impact assessment. Again, I hope it's not just a rubber stamping exercise. I hope this environmental impact assessment will be meaningful. Because if it is, then I think the applicants might wake up with a very nasty, sour face. But That's just a hope for the future. Ultimately, what I want to say is thank you for the motion, and I certainly will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sally Perks.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to say that the Labour group will be supporting the amended motion. We're pleased that Councillor Bailey and Councillor Cave have brought this to the Vale of Glamorgan Council. As Councillor Bailey stated, working with all sides on Barry Town Council, we've worked together to facilitate reports into the biomass application and stuff like that. And part of me feels at times, though we did a really good job and we, you know, sort of having the capital reports done, that biomass then went away and used these reports to amend what they had to get them through the various different loopholes and things like that. And I feel it is really important that the Vale of Glamorgan Council sends this message to biomass that together we oppose what they are wanting to bring to this town. I've already spoken to a resident who lives within the Court Ward area who's concerned about the mass dumping of wood chip on the docks and the way that that has been dumped, the dust that has permeated around the town, that has actually affected their sort of medical conditions that they have. They've given me permission to speak about them tonight, that they've had to go to the GP this week. They've had to have steroids because it's affected their breathing. And I just think this is just one person. You know, once this incinerator is up and running, I think the effects on the town could be very grave indeed. So yes, the Labour Party support this motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Owen Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to echo the sentiments of Councillor Bailey. I was going to say before the opposition members started speaking that this Labour group is supporting entirely the motion proposed by Councillor Bailey. And I was going to suggest, along the same sentiments, that politics should no longer be playing a part in this. But as Plaid Cymru have raised the issue about who set up the diet group, I want to point out gently that it was in fact the Councillor Pamela Drake and the former Councillor Chris Elmore who were pivotal in the setup in 2008 of the diet group. Now is not the time for this chamber to play politics on this matter, and this Labour group will wholeheartedly support the motion of Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Kevin Marnie.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out that on two previous occasions, both of this administration and the previous administration, I asked in questions whether the council as an authority would be engaging somebody of national or international renown of these matters of biomass plants in order to scrutinise and put representations in on behalf of the people of the Vale and the council itself. And both times was met with the answer no. I was pleased on the second request by the current administration that a fortnight after that they did actually put in an objection to the NRW's consultation process. But here's my thing. We've finally got an EIA. Throughout a sheer ignorance, I would have to ask, has any applicant for any planning application ever engaged an independent body to put in an EIA that actually said, no, we don't think this should go ahead? I'd be very surprised if that was the case. Is there anything stopping the Vale doing its own EIA, paying for it? I'm sure that's what the people of the Vale would want, to see if it concurs with the conclusions of the applicant's EIA. Because surely that would be the only independent way of doing that, and knowing that we're being told the truth. Or, I say not the truth, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Marnie. Councillor Nick Hodges.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I note the wording within the amended motion, and I both agree. The phrasing within there, I both regret and I have concerns, but I am also angry. Barry Town Council, as previously mentioned, took the brave stance in using taxpayers' money to get clear, independent, technical advice. Our own council here failed to do that. In fact, I still believe that the experts that Barry Town Council used are far more qualified than the government experts of NRW. It's nice now for council, it looks like possibly unanimously tonight, to accept that I was right how I voted in the council planning meeting in 2015. I said that there were issues with this plant. I said that it would be a blight on our town, and I think now everyone has come over to that view. It's fine to have concerns. It's fine to have regrets. It's also time to admit that errors were made by this council. There is no net gain in this town to have this incinerator.
No.
In terms of jobs, in terms of our environment, and in terms of the snarl up that will inevitably come on our roads. This incinerator will cost us jobs. It will cost us economic activity. It will be a blight. It will prevent other firms or interests coming into our town. It is time for NRW to prove that it is a body worth of use, that it actually now stands up for the people of Wales, the people of the Vale of Glamorgan, and the people of Barry. I hope that this EIA, long overdue, and something we called for years ago, will actually be of use and will not be the rubber stamp that I fear it will be. I will support this motion as amended. It's a shame it's come too late. I see members on our own cabinet who were in that planning meeting in 2015 and voted for the incinerator. I think God likes a trier. I think also God likes people who change their minds no matter how late. Thank you.
Councillor Gwyn John.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We at Lantred Mage the motion, most definitely. We have issues with Natural Resources Wales for many years down at Landau with the number of fires we've had there. And I've been involved with these officers for many, many years, and quite honestly, I cannot accept some of the decisions they make. And I have my own feeling about this from day one, that this would never have been put forward. Would you ever put a building forward for a planning application unless you knew or you'd consulted the body deciding on the environment, Natural Resources Wales? They must have been consulting in the very, very beginning before this came out with what was going ahead there. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll be honest with you, we've got Landau, the blight along us, and the caravan park at Landau has been destroyed by Natural Resources Wales allowing so much to go on up there. And I support the people of Barry and everyone here tonight. I feel it's absolutely a blight on Barry, and quite honestly, we will be supporting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John. Councillor George Carroll.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to begin by thanking Councillors Bailey and Cave for bringing forward this motion this evening. The issue of the incinerator at Barry Docks has been a controversial one for many years, and this is hardly surprising given the scale and location of the site. For my part, Madam Mayor, I'm quite clear in that I consider the site to be wholly unsuitable and was bitterly disappointed by the decision that Natural Resources Wales made to grant the environmental permit. I'm a firm believer that we should always put the people first and not let party politics get in the way of issues of this magnitude, and it's really pleasing to see the cross-party support from members of all groups in this council this evening. This has been of benefit to the campaign that we've worked cross-party, and representatives both on this council and indeed AMs, MPs and others, members of the public and indeed the DIAG campaign group, who've all worked tirelessly, has been to the benefit of this campaign. As members will be aware, the situation has moved on somewhat since Councillor Bailey tabled his initial motion, with the new Minister for Environment now indicating that she is minded to direct that an environmental impact assessment be carried out. I therefore welcome the amended motion that was brought forward by Councillor Bailey this evening and support it. While I have previously been disappointed by a lack of willingness on the part of the Welsh Government to intervene, I am pleased that they have now indicated a desire to do so and welcome this. This is a step that is in the right direction and one that we should be welcoming. Ultimately, no guarantees have yet been made, so it is vital that we continue to work together to keep up the pressure on what is a very important issue. The Minister, in her statement about a fortnight ago, made clear that any requirement for an EIA is still subject to representations from the applicant. It's now our job to maintain the pressure and ensure that the Minister carries out her initial pledge to insist on an EIA. We have, of course, faced many challenges and setbacks on this journey, but we have now received good news, and it's vital that we continue to press. We must never give up, since it is by standing together, working as one, that we'll deliver for our communities.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you to all the other councillors who've spoken tonight in favour of this motion, which I will also be speaking in favour of, as amended by self-amended by Councillor Bailey. I, of course, will not be saying anything that would compromise my position in the Planning Committee when the next set of applications are being debated. It's actually quite fascinating and heartening, as some of the people have pointed to the way in which the Docks Incinerator Action Group has worked hard for such a long time. To be honest, I think it's very rare for any campaign group of any nature to live for nearly 10 years campaigning on the same issue. I hope that, depending on the outcome, that's maybe the Incinerator Action Group won't have to spend the rest of their lives campaigning on this issue and safety either. I do remember I was archiving my emails recently and came across an email from former councillor Keith Stockdale to former councillor Barry Shaw saying that Paul Arnold had contacted them about setting up an action group. That was April 2009. I think it is worth remembering, and other councillors from the area, Councillor Elmore and Councillor Drake, also played a big role at that time. And I remember attending hustings meetings with Councillor Marnie, amongst others, where we were being quizzed by Friends of the Earth and by members of DIAG, who were part of the campaign against the incinerators that were first being proposed back in 2008, 2009. One of the problems with this motion is, of course, that we don't have control over Natural Resources Wales and what they do. So, with all due respect, there's a certain element of grandstanding that's going on here, however much we all agree with each other. Part of this is the problem, the separation of powers within our system between that which is planning and that which is licensing and permitting. And there was a problem that, as I think was referred to by a councillor earlier, that every step that we've taken to challenge and qualify has been taken by Barry Town Council, by DIAG, by others, has been used by the applicant to improve their application and therefore make it more likely that it would be acceptable to Natural Resources Wales. This is because it's not a weight of evidence thing. This is a permitting system, allows people an iterative process where they move on time after time until they get what they want. Because the purpose of Natural Resources Wales is not to reject or refuse, but actually to facilitate and allow. And this is the problem that we see with us as local councillors, is that you have technocrats, and it's a similar effect in the planning system when something is decided by our planning committee and then is sent off to the planning inspectorate, that actually the technocrats turn up and say, we think this is good enough and we don't care what happens to you locally. Now, while I'm grateful that there is fantastic cross-party support, the reality is that system is set up by the current government in Cardiff Bay and maintained by the current government in Cardiff Bay. So while we don't want to be political tonight, we're working within a system that is set up by politicians. It might be implemented by technocrats, but it is set up by politicians. Now, what happens in the meeting when we discuss this in Planning Committee will be hugely important. I hope that all the people here tonight also come along to that meeting and listen to the evidence that's presented to the Planning Committee when Planning Committee will make their decision on that element of this application. But I think it's worth reminding ourselves that we here do not control Natural Resources Wales, that the people who do control Natural Resources Wales should have stepped in earlier and should have asked these things to be taking place, such as an environmental impact assessment, back in 2015 and back before then. I was in the, I remember being in the Barry Town Council Planning Committee back in 2009 as a member of the public before I was elected, sat there listening to evidence. I remember being sat in the Planning Committee in 2015 when just before that meeting started, a letter was photocopied and handed round to councillors telling them that an environmental impact assessment was not required and could not be used as a reason to reject. That decision, I believe, was wrong. I'm glad to see that it's being looked at again 3 years later, but if that decision is right now, it should have been right then as well. So, as Councillor Collins has said, we support the motion as amended by Councillor Bailey. I look forward to every member of this council hopefully supporting it, but I also recognise that this is not the real debate, and that real debate will be one that will be discussed by the Planning Committee when that does reach that committee at some point in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor John Thomas, the leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I firstly say that I fully support the motion, the amended motion from Councillor Bailey. What concerns me most is that one person appointed by the Welsh Government could overturn the decision of a democratically elected committee of this council, which quite rightly refused the first application for the biomass plant. I believe it was inappropriate to build the biomass plant in the position in which it is situated, and my opinion has not changed. But if this plant does get up and running, I will ensure that our SRS officers do everything in their power to ensure the health of the residents of Barry. And can I point out that they are independent specialists, and they have commented on all aspects of the permitting process to date and recommended that the plant should not receive an environmental permit for use, but obviously that has been overturned by NRW. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Would you like to sum up, Councillor Bailey?
I didn't realise I had to do that, but I'm delighted, obviously, with the cross-party support. Thanks to everyone who's spoken today. I know a lot of people have made some points about the past. As a new councillor, I think it's really important that we take this opportunity to look forward. We can send a statement. Councillor Johnson is right that the real debate takes place in other forums, but as a collective, as an institution, we had a chance this evening. It looks like we're going to take it to speak as one and to let the people of Barry, the people of the Vale know that we don't tolerate this and we don't want it to happen. Thanks everyone for supporting.
All those in favour, show of hands please. Do we have any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you very much. And it's passed. The next agenda item, I'm going to move agenda item 15 for the simple reason that this is going to be a very long meeting this evening, and I'd love you all to stay for as long as you like, but for those people that do have families to get back to, I'm going to do questions now from members of the public. And the first question is from Mrs. Beverly Bailey. Is she here this evening? No. The question is to the Cabinet Member of Regeneration and Planning. Do you have a reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The reply to the question is as follows. The building control function of local authorities includes, tongue-tied, the responsibility for dealing with dangerous structures and seeks to ensure that reasonable standards of safety are achieved under sections 77 and 78 of the Building Act 1984. However, it is important to note that it is the responsibility of the relevant owner to ensure that if a structure is deemed dangerous, it is removed. In addition, a structure would normally be only deemed dangerous if it is considered to be in danger of imminent collapse. If an owner fails to remove a dangerous structure, and if it appears to a local authority that a building or structure is in such a condition or is used to carry such loads as to be dangerous, the local authority can, under Section 77, apply to a magistrate's court for an order requiring the owner to 1. Execute such work as may be necessary. 2. If they so elect, to demolish the building or structure. And 3. To restrict its use. Having said this, normal practice is to serve an informal notice letter requesting the owner to remedy the problem within a stated period before the authority resorts to court action. The local authority may recover from the owner the expenses reasonably incurred by them under Section 78, i.e. the removal of the structure. But the Act does not allow for the recovery of the expenses for work done under Section 77 unless the work is done in default. The Council will in the first instance always try to work with the relevant owners and try to remedy any issue, especially when those affected are the owners of the actual structure itself.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Question number 2 is from Mrs. Joanne Creek. Is she here this evening? Would you like to read your question? Or are you happy just for the answer? Please do. Thank you, Mrs. Cheek. And the question goes to the Executive Leader and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources.
Thank you, Mrs. Cheek, for your question. The reply: the foul and surface water systems for this site are separate and were properly assessed as part of the planning process. Any surface water drainage discharges from the site will be assessed by Natural Resources Wales and the Council to ensure that the water quality is appropriate for the discharge location.
I'm sorry, but members of the public aren't allowed a supplementary question. Moving on to question number 3, which is from Mr. Dennis Clark. Would you like to read it? Thank you. And the question goes to the Leader, Councillor John Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your question. Operations on site are regulated by NRW through compliance with the environmental permit they have issued. The permit details the types of wood waste that can be accepted on site for processing and the controls that are in place to prevent harmful emissions to the environment. The environmental permit includes conditions on the commissioning and testing phase, including a requirement that at least 1 month prior to the commencement of commissioning, the operator must provide a written commissioning plan for approval by Natural Resources Wales. Our specialist officers within Shared Regulatory Services have confirmed with Natural Resources Wales that they are content that the pre-operational conditions set have been complied with, and are content that the proposed commissioning plan will provide a high level of environmental protection. Specifically in relation to fence panels, the majority of fence panels would be suitable for being processed. However, any wood that has been treated with hazardous substances such as creosote would not be classified as suitable for processing at the plant.
Thank you. Moving on to question 4, which is from Ms. Julia Brunskill. Question goes to the Deputy Leader.
Thank you for your question. This will be a matter for the owners of the plant. That said, the Council will clearly be seeking to ensure that all relevant pre-commencement conditions attached to the planning permission are discharged prior to the first operation of the plant and subsequent generation of electricity. The Council do not regulate the site but are in contact with NRW and will encourage the operators and NRW to provide regular updates to the local community on the operations at the site. As mentioned in the previous reply, the environmental permit includes conditions on the commissioning and testing phase, including a requirement that at least 1 month prior to the commencement of commissioning, the operator must provide a written commissioning plan for approval by Natural Resources Wales. Our specialist officers within Shared Regulatory Services have confirmed with Natural Resources Wales that they are content that the pre-operational conditions set have been complied with and are content that the proposed commissioning plan will provide a high level of environmental protection.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Question number 5 is from Mr. Leo Santos. Thank you for your question. This goes to the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Leo Santos, is it? Yes, sorry about that. We have seen no evidence to suggest that this will be the case. There is a separate strategy for managing foul and surface water at the site, and this is detailed as part of the latest planning application. The proposals for a foul water connection serving the site will be subject to an approval by the appropriate regulators, including Dŵr Cymru and Natural Resources Wales. This separate disposal of foul and surface water make any adverse impact on the number and duration of discharges of the current combined sewer overflow into the docks unlikely. Again, as mentioned previously, the environmental permit includes conditions on the commissioning and testing phase, including a requirement that at least 1 month prior to the commencement of commissioning, the operator must provide a written commissioning plan for approval by Natural Resources Wales. Our specialist officers within the SRS team have confirmed with NRW that they are content that the pre-operational conditions have been set and complied with, and are content that the proposed commissioning plan will provide a high level of environmental protection.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Moving on to question number 6 from Miss Christina Polakis. This is to the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Planning.
Hi, thanks for the question. While the officers of the Council do meet colleagues from NRW, I hope you all understand NRW, Natural Resources Wales, meet on occasion. This is on an ad hoc basis and usually with regard to specific sites or issues that emerge during the consideration of planning proposals. These meetings are at officer level and are not public meetings, and are only arranged as and when required. SRS liaise with NRW on a range of sites that they regulate within the Vale of Glamorgan and discuss any emerging issues, intelligence or complaints. NRW take the lead in convening these meetings with the council, and again, they are not public meetings.
Ms Poulakis, question number 7. Thank you. Leader?
Thank you, Ms Poulakis. Following an assessment of amended proposals for the Barry gasification plant, Welsh Government is now minded to direct that the planning application should be accompanied by an environmental impact assessment. And the Council is currently awaiting the outcome of discussions between Welsh Government and the applicant over the requirement for this. The Welsh Government has advised that it is not currently minded to detail why they have changed their view in this instance, and the Council awaits further clarification in this regard. At this stage, Welsh Government has invited comments from the applicant prior to issuing a final decision. The environmental impact assessment procedures are governed by the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Wales Regulations 2016, and if required, the applicant for planning permission must provide the required information so the environmental effects of the development can be assessed. The regulations stipulate the way in which the information should be presented, provide for additional advertising and consultation by the applicant, and also require a longer statutory period for determining an application, 16 weeks instead of 8. The requirement for an environmental impact assessment, or EIA for short, does not necessarily mean that any additional environmental information will be required to be submitted to the Council. As in the case of all developments, the authority should consider the environmental impact. However, the regulations do require this information is provided in a particular format known as an environmental statement. With regard to the current applications, if Welsh Government directs that an EIA is required, the Council will of course require the applicant to undertake an EIA and submit an environmental statement. And full consideration will be undertaken with all relevant statutory consultees prior to any recommendation being made to the Planning Committee. Any subsequent report to the Planning Committee will fully deal with all matters included in the environmental impact of the proposals, and it will be for the Planning Committee to make its decision having full regard to all relevant material considerations, including national guidance and the policies contained within the local development plan.
Thank you, Leader. Question 8 from Mr Max Wallace. Is Mr Wallace here this evening? No, we'll go to the answer then, please, to the Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The environmental permit issued by NRW stipulates that emissions from the activities at the site shall be free from noise and vibration at levels likely to cause pollution outside the site. The schedule to the permit also includes requirements on the operator to monitor and report on any adverse impacts due to noise from the operation of the plant. Whilst NRW remain the primary regulator for the site, this council would work closely with them to investigate any noise complaints from local residents.
Thank you. Moving back to the order in the agenda, which is agenda item 6, nominations of Mayor-elect and Deputy Mayor for the municipal year. Could I have nominations for Mayor-elect, please? Councillor Moore.
Can I formally move Councillor Bronwyn Brooks?
Any other nominations? Councillor Catherine McCaffer.
I'd like to nominate Leighton Rowlands, please.
Councillor Gray.
I second that motion, nomination.
Thank you. Do we have any more nominations? Thank you. All those in favour of Councillor Bronwyn Brooks, please show. All those against? Oh, sorry. All those in favour for Leighton Rowlands? So Councillor Leighton Rowlands is Mayor-elect. Can I now have nominations, please, for Deputy Mayor-elect? Councillor Neil Moore.
Might as well try again. Councillor Bronwyn Brooks.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Driscoll. Do you have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favour for Bronwyn Brooks? Thank you. All those in favour for Councillor Cave? Councillor Cave is Deputy Mayor-elect for the municipal year. Thank you. Congratulations. Congratulations. Agenda item 7 is the use of the Managing Director's emergency powers. And that is just for noting, I believe. Thank you. Members' notes. Agenda item 8, consultation with non-domestic ratepayers. Leader? I believe we, sorry Leader, I believe we don't have any representations and I can confirm that we have received none. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 9. Report of the monitoring officer. Review of the council's constitution, officer delegation. Councillor Hunter Jarvie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report seeks approval of a number of changes to the officer delegations contained in the council's constitution. The main points being as follows: that all directors, in consultation with the relevant cabinet member, be authorised to submit and accept future external funded grant applications and allocations for revenue funding over £75,000 and to enter into the associated grant terms and conditions, which is in line with the Cabinet's resolution of the 18th of December last year. Secondly, that the delegation to the Managing Director as proper officer to witness the signing of declarations of acceptance of office and undertakings to abide by the Council's Members' Code of Conduct be extended to the Managing Directors in his absence to the Monitoring Officer or the Deputy Monitoring Officer. Thirdly, that the delegated powers which are set out in paragraph 7 of this report be amended as indicated. Next, that references to pages 254 and 311 of the Council's Constitution, which we all know off by heart, I'm sure, to Business Support Manager, be amended to read Operational Manager, brackets, Commissioning and Information, close brackets. This reflects the current staff structure of the Social Services Directorate. And lastly, that the delegated authorities set out in paragraph 9 of the report be amended in line with the track-changed amendments to streamline existing processes and reflect the legislative changes and the changing nature of grant funding available to the Council. So I recommend that the Council accepts the resolution as drafted, and I so move.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. All those for? So moved. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10, which is the report of the Director of Environment and Housing Services, and it's the Housing Business Plan. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This addresses the Housing Business Plan 2018. The Welsh Government requires that all local authorities who have retained their housing stock to submit an annual 30-year housing business plan. The business plan must be submitted by the 31st of March 2018 and requires council approval. The submission forms the basis of the Major Repairs Allowance Grant application, which provides the council with nearly £2.8 million of grant funding from the Welsh Government. The financial model in the plan incorporates the investment required to maintain the housing stock. The council's aspirations for the development of new housing stock and regeneration and environmental works. This plan is more ambitious than the previous plan, as additional investment is being allocated on the new build and acquisitions programme. It is proposed that 176 units are developed in the first 5 years of the plan, with 24.993 million of investments, and 9.5 million will be spent on environmental and regeneration during the same period. £32 million has been allocated over the 5-year period for maintenance of the current housing stock. The plan is viable over the 30 years as it retains an annual surplus throughout, and also the borrowing used to fund capital expenditure does not exceed the borrowing cap of 103.7 million, which has been set by the Welsh Government. The plan is based on a series of assumptions, and therefore sensitivity analysis has to be carried out to check whether the plan is robust. Under some of the sensitivities, the plan fails. However, it does not fail until year 8 at the earliest, and therefore this would prove sufficient time to adjust investment decisions if the scenarios materialise. In the first instance, the Council would reassess its development programme to mitigate any shortfalls. The plan will ensure that housing stock is maintained and developed over the coming years, and I would therefore recommend that the Council approve the Housing Business Plan 2018 for submission to the Welsh Government.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much to the Cabinet Member for the report. It is a very good and valuable report, and some of the elements regarding the capital finance requirements were discussed last night in the Audit Committee, and that was also of great interest. I am, of course, very supportive of the impact that's the positive impact on this council of the HRA subsidy buyout in 2015. I think that's been hugely important, and releasing that money is allowing us to build these new houses. I do just want to make a couple of comments on the report itself. The first one, I'm slightly tongue-in-cheek, is I noticed that there are in the appendix and the Housing Business Plan, there are actually 2 separate introductory forwards from the leader and from the Cabinet Member. I'm not sure that we need 2 different introductions to the same document by you both. That's you might want to consider in future whether brevity might be an improvement. But more seriously, there is a point on page 6. On page 6, where we're talking about 28 houses being built during 2018-2019. I'm assuming that refers to Brecon Courts, which is the subject of a recent cabinet report. The problem is that when Brecon Court previously had 32 units, so we actually have a reduction in the number of units compared to where Brecon Court was before that demolition. So I wouldn't be quite so smug about sort of a rebuild programme when there's fewer than before. More seriously, again, one of the issues that's raised as a risk is the impact of 2012 Welfare Reform Act. Now that suggests an impact of up to £4 million as a result of the introduction of universal credit and the various other issues that surround welfare reform. I find it quite strange, not a little surreal, that I have a Conservative council bringing forward documents that show how stupid Conservative Party policy is. I wonder what conversations you've had with the Secretary of State for Wales, our local MP, to see what can be done to mitigate these risks by, for example, scrapping the policy altogether. We'll be discussing it later on, I'm sure, in the budget. I'm very happy with the report, but that's a very serious problem to face when you're the ones responsible for it.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. We are bringing forward the planning application on Brecon Court. I think it should be 28 units, but I'll stand corrected. But the design process is going on at present. Regarding the second point, we do not have a great deal of problem in collecting the rents. I think it's 2% at the moment failure. So with regard to the government policy, I'll leave that to another day. Thank you.
All those in favour? Moving on to agenda item 11, can I ask the chief officers to leave, please? Oh, sorry, Councillor Moore.
Can I ask just for, can we take this at the end of the meeting, because then it disrupts the meeting less, because all officers have to leave? Could we delay it until after?
Yeah, I'm happy with that, thank you. Moving on to 11B, Treasury Management and Investment Statement. Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of the report before you is to present the interim report on the Council's Treasury Management operations for the period of the 1st of April 2017 to the 31st of December 2017. And to submit for consideration the proposed 2018-2019 Treasury Management and Investment Strategy. Insofar as the Council's Treasury Management operations entered into for the period 1st of April 2017 to the 31st of December 2017 are concerned, all activities were in accordance with the Council's approved strategy on Treasury Management. The details of the monies borrowed and repaid and those invested are outlined in the report. Capital expenditure, when financed by long-term debt, incurs two elements of cost: interest on and repayment of the principal sum borrowed. The resources the Council must put aside in each year to repay the principal sum borrowed is known as the Minimum Revenue Provision, MRP. On the 31st of January 2018, Audit Committee considered and agreed a report proposing changes in the way in which this will be calculated from 2018-19 onwards. The new approach is in line with the approach a number of Welsh authorities have adopted, reflects new guidance in England and for the treatment of MRP, and the Welsh Audit Office has confirmed that it is comfortable with the approach being taken. With regard to the Treasury Management and Investment Strategy 2018-19, there are a few changes to the document in particular. Due to the recent announcement by Northamptonshire that it is unlikely to submit a balanced budget in 2018-19, the investment strategy has been amended to set a maximum period of 6 months for any investments in local authorities. And the Council will pursue the possible use of other investment tools. However, the importance of capital security will still outweigh the importance of financial performance. And I move that the Council approve the Treasury Management Investment Strategy, including the following specific resolutions. The authorised limit for external debt be set at 203.681 million for 2017-18, 216.031 million for 2018-19, 226.060 million for 2019-20, and 226.292 million for 2020-21. The operational boundary for external debt be set at 175 million. 175.441 million for 2017-18, 195.637 million for 2018-19, 199.906 million for 2019-20, and 206.012 million for 2020-21. The Section 151 officer be given delegated authority within the total authorised limit and operational boundary as estimated for individual years to effect movement between the separately agreed limits for borrowing and other long-term liabilities. An upper limit is set on its fixed interest rate exposure of 149.265 million for 2017-18 and of 154.046 million for 2019-20, 159.482 million for 2020-21, of 165.62 million of its net outstanding principal sum on its borrowed investments. An upper limit is set on its variable interest rate exposure of £0 for 2017-18, 2018-19, 2019-20 and 2020-21, and of its net outstanding principal sum on its investments. And an upper limit of 5 million for 2017-18, 5 million for 2018-19, 2 million for 2019-20 and 2020-21 is set for the total principal sums invested for over 364 days. The amount of projected borrowing that is fixed rate maturing in each period as a percentage of total projected borrowing that is fixed rate for 2018-19 be set as detailed in the strategy. The prudential indicators set out in Appendix 1 be approved, and the Treasury Management Policy set out in Appendix 2 be approved. And I so move.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Leader, for that report, because we had a long discussion at this audit last night and also a previous meeting of the Audit Committee, and as Chair of the Audit Committee, I fully support this strategy. I think this strategy is a realistic strategy given the situation, and I think you pointed out very much the issues of Northampton County Council, and I think that's a very serious situation, and therefore I do think we need to look for other streams for our investments. And I did make a couple of suggestions last night, which I know the Section 151 officer along with their team are actively looking at, because obviously as a council we need to raise more money because, you know, things are tough. Austerity is hard and it's not going to go away. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the report. I mean, this is something that's, you know, for those who don't spend far too much time on the audit and corporate performance committees, this sounds like incredibly dull, but actually the impact is quite substantial, because this is a discussion about the capital financing that we just discussed in the housing plan, and the changes that were agreed by the audit committee in January on the minimum revenue provision are quite substantial, because this is how we account for for the way we'll be paying things forward in future. Now, the impact of that is that immediately, according to the figures in item 11D today on the revenue budget, those savings of 1.6 million pounds? No, yeah, 1.6 million. Make up a quarter of the savings that this council will be making next year. So the changes in guidance are therefore bringing out a major impact, because that's 1.6 million pounds of savings that this council won't be required to find from frontline services, and shouldn't be needing to find anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson. All in favour? Agenda item 11C, Leader.
Yeah, I'm Julie. Sorry, I'd like to say the same, please.
Thank you. Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Find my list.
11C.
Yeah, I think I got it. The report before you presents the final housing revenue account budget proposals for 2018-19 and the proposed rents and service charges for the coming financial year, commencing on the 2nd of April 2018. Each local housing authority is required under Section 74 of the 1989 Local Government and Housing Act to keep a housing revenue account. Section 76 of the Act requires local authorities to set a budget for their housing revenue account on an annual basis. The budget must be such that the housing revenue account is not in deficit at the end of the year. Each local authority should endeavour to have a working balance on the HRA for any exceptional circumstances that may arise. The initial HRA budget proposals were considered by Cabinet on the 20th of November 2017 and they were subsequently referred to the Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee on the 6th of December 2017, who noted the proposals, as did Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 14th of December 2017. In finalising this budget, we have been mindful of the policy for social housing rents, which was issued by Welsh Government in December 2017, which allows a maximum uplift of CPI as of September 2017 plus 1.5% plus £2. The details of how the budget has been made up are in the Cabinet report, which members will previously have received. It is proposed that rents are increased by 3%, which is within the Welsh Government limits and is enough to support the housing 30-year business plan. So basically we've taken the 3%, which is the rate which was set as being CPI in September 2017, and haven't added on the 1.5% or the £2. That does allow us to support the housing 30-year business plan. As well as increasing rents, the report also outlines the proposed increases in other charges, and these are detailed in the report, and those charges are charges for the actual costs incurred by the council. There's no profit being made on those. And the recommendation is that Council approve the final HRA budget proposals for 2018-19, that the rent increase of 3%, which is CPI, or was CPI, be approved and recommended to Council as set out in paragraphs 15 to 17. The increase suggested for other services are approved and recommended to Council as set out in paragraphs 18 to 31. The charges for services outlined for the 2018-19 financial year be recommended to Council, and all changes to rents and service charges are implemented from the 2nd of April 2018, and the increased notices are sent to tenants 28 days in advance of the new charges coming into effect. I so move.
Second, Madam.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the report. I welcome the rent increase has been pegged to CPI rather than greater than CPI. I think that is positive, although it's a shame that CPI is as high as it is, given that 2% has been the Bank of England target for many years, and the sudden increase has an impact on all sorts of budgets. I just want to clarify with regards to the projected income and expenditure of the housing revenue account next year. The amended budget for 2017-18 shows that £90,000 was used for provision for bad debt, but next year it's going to be 1.159 million. That's quite a difference. Could you explain why?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I think you know the answer to the question probably is that it's been put in there as a precaution against the rollout of universal credit. Hopefully it won't be necessary to be used, but it's there in case.
Thank you, Leader. All those in favour? Okay. Thank you. 11D, final capital proposals 2018-19, 2022-23. Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The report before you presents the final proposals for the capital budget for this council for the 5-year period of 2018-19 to 2022-23. The initial capital programme proposals were presented to Cabinet on the 20th of November 2017, as subsequently referred to the scrutiny committees in November and December 2017. The comments of the scrutiny committees have been taken into account in the development of this 5-year programme. Since the draft proposals were submitted in November 2017, all schemes in the capital programme have been reviewed to determine if the scheme is still required, and to review if there are any changes to the timings and or costs of the schemes. The changes requested are reflected in these proposals and are outlined later in this report. All bids have been prioritised in terms of corporate priority, the risk to the authority if they are not progressed, and the contribution they make to the well-being of future generations criteria. The programme detailed in this report will be funded through a number of different sources, including general capital funding from the Welsh Government, the use of capital receipts resulting from the sale of assets, the use of reserves that have been established for that purpose, and Section 106 monies or borrowing money which has to be repaid through the revenue budget. There are some amendments to the 2017-18 capital programme detailed within this report. In particular, changes are requested where schemes are unlikely to be completed in the current financial year. Therefore, there are requests to slip the funding to 2018-19. The proposed programme for 2018-19 to 2022-23 is attached at Appendix 1 to this report and shows a total spend of 60 million in 2018-19 and a total 5-year programme in excess of 250 million. There have been a number of changes to the programme since the initial capital programme proposals were prepared, including new schemes in Lansana and Gwenbow schools, open space improvements, play area improvements and sustainable transport improvements, all of which are funded via Section 106 contributions. The programme also includes a significant investment in the resurfacing of the roads in the county. As a result of Welsh Government support for road infrastructure in the current year, we have been able to carry forward our funding of 1.136 million to 2018-19. In addition to that, a further 1 million has been put into the programme for further resurfacing work next year. In relation to 21st century schools, the Council has received an approval in principle for Band B funding with an estimated cost envelope of 142.4 million. And this was approved by Cabinet on the 22nd of January. These proposals are now included in the 5-year capital programme. The report also details the level investment required to maintain WHQS standards, flood prevention works, funding for disabled facilities grants, and funding in relation to the Barry Regeneration Partnership. And I move that Council approves the final budget proposals for the capital programme for the years 2018-19 to 2022-23 as set out in Appendix 1. The Managing Director and Head of Finance, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, is given delegated authority to make additions, deletions or transfers to and from the 2018-19 to 2022-23 Housing Improvement Programme as appropriate. The Managing Director and the Head of Finance, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, is given delegated authority to make additions, deletions or transfers to or from the 2018-19 to 2022-23 asset renewal budgets as appropriate. 4. The Managing Director and the Head of Finance, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, is given delegated authority to make additions, deletions or transfers to or from the 2018-19 Victorian Schools budget as appropriate. 5. The Managing Director and the Head of Finance, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, is given delegated authority to make additions, deletions or transfers to Section 106 funded schemes subject to member consultation as required under the existing process. 6. The Managing Director and the Head of Finance, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, is given delegated authority to make additions, deletions or transfers to or from the 2018-19 Energy Conservation Refit budget as appropriate. And finally, 7. The Council approves the changes to the 2017-18 and the 2018-19 to 2022-23 capital programme as outlined in the report. I so move.
Second.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Neil Moore.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, John. Thank you, Leader. I note that the Budget Working Group took some notice of the scrutiny recommendations, and I was very pleased to see the previous highway improvements being amended, as was the provision for play areas in the vehicle replacement programme. I also note the continuation of the school's investment strategy that was put in place in order to bid for the Band B schools funding and the continued improvements of other schools to the Section 106 and asset renewals. I'm also very pleased that the Welsh Government has agreed in principle to continue the funding of 50% to the Band E costs, subject, of course, to the proven business plans being presented as always. However, I also note that that strategy, as the 21st century schools, is heavily dependent upon receipts on capital receipts, and clearly those can't be guaranteed. So I hope that everybody will bear that in mind, is that it's an important facet of the plan that we gain as much money as we possibly can to reinvest in that particular plan. Although this will be a tough budget to achieve, I'm broadly supportive of the capital budget proposals, but, there's always going to be a but, I'm very mindful of the budgetary problems experienced this year, and therefore the Council's financial position at the end of this financial year. However, saying that, I cannot ignore the multitude of changes to the 2017-18 capital programme. I'm seriously concerned that there have been too many schemes slipped and carried forward into next year, along with the requirements to reprofile many of the savings over longer periods, which is, in my mind, just slippage by another name. On a cursory glance, I note that over £4.2 million has been slipped from 2017-18 to 2018-19, and that figure does not take into account the significant amount of reprofiling that has taken place on schemes, which in themselves total millions upon millions of pounds. It's pretty difficult to work out the slippage on those because they are now going over many years. Although I noticed that 1.7 million of that slippage relates to 5 Mile Lane, there seems to have been little activity on that scheme since the last report to Cabinet in July 2017. This is despite the compulsory purchase of land having been agreed, and I consider that stalling to be very disturbing, particularly as the scheme is Welsh Government funded. So I would therefore ask for a further report to be brought to scrutiny to fully update our members. I think it's important that we know exactly what's going on, what happened, where the delays are, and that we know that we're on track. Because it is important. One of the things that we did do was ensure the Welsh Government was going to fund it all. So we have to make sure that that happens. I'd also, and I have to, I'm afraid, refer to the slip scheme and an absolute disaster as far as I'm concerned of the dimmed Lightning Street lighting LED lantern replacement scheme. This scheme has slipped yet again into next year. This should have been completed by the summer at the latest, but it hasn't even been started yet, unless, of course, it started today. As was suggested in a very timely email last week. I doubt it, particularly with the weather, but if it has, then great. It's a great shame, however, that the projected winter month savings have not been achieved, thus adding, as it does to the Council's savings shortfalls this year. Finally, although I would agree with the proposals put forward in the programme of works, in other words, yes, we have to get on with the works, yes, we have to do them, I hope they will be actually carried out in 2018-19. Regrettably, I have to admit that I have no confidence that they will be achieved, bearing in mind the substantial amount of slippage and reprofiling recorded in this report and during this year. I had hoped that you could have ensured that the capital programme was on track and chased it if it wasn't. I am therefore abstaining on these proposals, but because I think I haven't the confidence that it's a good budget, but I haven't got the confidence that it could be achieved. But please be assured that there'll be a great deal more scrutiny in the coming financial year, because quite clearly I don't think that you've done the job properly.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Unlike Councillor Moore, I'll be supporting this because I want to see these schemes happen. So abstain doesn't seem a particularly useful option in this. I do welcome the investment in Band B 21st Century Schools projects. I think a cursory glance at some of the comprehensive schools in Barry compared to some of their comparators elsewhere shows that investment hasn't been as equal as it could have been in recent years. That's the nature of the game, and I'm glad to see those schools catching up in the next couple of years in the new build school at Port Road, Whitmore High, you know, as it comes forward. I would also welcome the amounts being spent or reprofiled, re-put in regarding road improvements and resurfacing. Naturally, I think everybody sort of welcomes that, but as it's a job that's never finished, then I'd be interested to know how long would it take to fill those potholes? How much do we really need to actually do this? And you know, is this the right way of going about it? I want to specifically ask regarding our investment in our community centres network. I believe the Vale Council has around 22 community centres, but we have around £15,000, I think it says in here, for our capital investment. I'm just wondering, sort of, whether similar to Council Moore, whether a report is necessary going to scrutiny one form or another to investigate the state of our network there. And also with regards to my ward, I'm aware of Section 106 monies being allocated or been consulted or discussed in the past around Section 106 money as a result of the recent development at Newbourne Court, which I think were intended to be spent at Central Park in Barry. So I'm just wondering where those might be within our system. One final point is that this is, of course, a 5-year plan or so until at least the next set of elections, but I can't see anything here about a Dinas Powys bypass. I'm just wondering if you could tell me where it is in our capital projects.
Ida, would you like to come back in?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, respond to some of the points that Neil made. Yes, we will make every effort to reinvest in the 21st century schools. I think it's an ambition of everybody within this council to improve our schools. I know you did a lot of work on it in your past administration, and we certainly intend to continue that. You mentioned that schemes have been slipped. Well, I think there was a slippage in schemes under your administration as well. And perhaps the ambition that you had when some of these schemes were put in place was a little bit over-ambitious, and that is why some of those schemes have had to slip. And reprofiling of savings, well, that happens all the time. Some of the savings, but the nature of savings is that you have to actually try and stretch, so sometimes they're not going to be achieved, so they need to be reprofiled. The LED replacement scheme, I'm sure that is starting very shortly. I know there was some problems with deciding which lamps we were going to run with, and but that is, I said, you've had the email to say that it is starting shortly, and I can assure you that that will all be in place before next winter, and so the savings will then be made. I assure you that we do think that the savings, that the capital budget that we're proposing is achievable, and we will welcome the scrutiny which you offer in times to come. Moving on.
5 Mile Lane's on
Oh, sorry, yeah, 5 Mile Lane, there's, if you drive down there now, there's traffic lights, I think both ends, they've started on site, and that is underway. There has been some slippage, but not a lot, but I'm sure that is all up to date now, and they are on site. Yeah, I think the Romans may have, they didn't really hold us up much because we managed to get the archaeology work done prior to starting the scheme, but it is up and running now. Councillor Johnson's remarks, thank you for the support for the budget, and like you, as I mentioned with Neil's points, we are looking forward to building the new schools, so that's good news all round. The road resurfacing, yes, there's £2 million going into road resurfacing in this budget for next year. I think that's more than ever before. The problem is it probably needs, I think, £2 million every year to go into road resurfacing for us to catch up. And whether that would be achievable in next year, I do not know at this stage. As far as the community centres are concerned, yeah, the budget isn't huge, but we have got a lot of pressures that we have to consider. And there are, as you also mentioned, Section 106 monies. There are Section 106 monies that are utilised for improvements in community centres as well as the budget within the capital programme. And the Dinas Powys bypass, well, all I can say really is I think we've done more in 9 months for the Dinas Powys bypass than this council has done in 9 years previously. We've got the Arcadis report now, the WellTag 2 report, which has been done by Arcadis, looking into it. That was funded by Welsh Government. There is a proposal to widen the scope of the WellTag, and if we cannot get Welsh Government to pay for that, I'm proposing that we probably should pay for that ourselves to make sure we get every opportunity to be successful. But as we all know, there was never enough money in this council to build a Dinas Powys bypass. So it's the ball will be in Welsh Government's court if the need is proven.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour of 11D? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to 11E, final proposals for the revenue budget 2018-19. Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The report before you presents the final proposals for the revenue budget for this council for the financial year 2018-19. The setting of the 2018-19 revenue budget has been done in a climate of ongoing austerity. The initial revenue budget proposals report for 2018-19 was presented to Cabinet on the 20th of November 2017 and has been considered by all scrutiny committees and the budget working group since that time. The budget setting process also included consultation with residents of the Vale of Glamorgan, and the budget presented to you today has taken into account the comments received as part of that exercise. Welsh Government has provided the Council with final figures for next year's settlement, which for this Council shows a total standard spending assessment of 222.84 million, which represents an adjusted increase of 2,473,000 over 2017-18. Certain grants have been transferred to the Revenue Support Grant in 2018-19, which has answered the request from local government that the monies could be better used to meet local needs if included in the RSG rather than received via a grant system. However, some of these funding streams have been reduced when transferred into the RSG. In particular, the waste element of the Environment and Sustainable Development Single Revenue Grant and the Minority Ethnic Achievement Grant in education, which for 2017-18 equated to 239,000 for the Vale of Glamorgan. The details with regard to these grants are contained within the report, and I can confirm that dialogue continues with Welsh Government in relation to these reductions. These changes have had an impact on our resources going forward into 2018-19. During 2018-19, additional pressure will continue to be placed on staffing budgets as a result of the implementation of the National Living Wage, which is an increase of 4.4% from the 2017-18 rate of £7.50. Also, a pay award of 2% has been included, with a higher percentage being assumed for scale points 19 and below. This has required additional funding to be identified from the initial budget proposals. The proposed budget for 2018-19 has been set in line with the current financial strategy, and a summary of the overall position is attached at Appendix C to the report. The Budget Working Group has reviewed and updated the cost pressures. Those which cannot be mitigated or reduced are included within a net growth figures of 8.717 million. The breakdown of this sum is shown at Appendix D and also includes transfers into the RSG. The savings have also been reviewed by the Budget Working Group. It will not be possible to implement some of the larger reshaping services savings in full during 2018-19, as they will require further time to be implemented, and therefore the targets for the visible services and commercial opportunities, the establishment review and the digital strategy projects have been profiled over a 2 to 3 year period. For 2018-19, proposed savings total 6.298 million, and details are included at Appendix E of this report. This level of savings will continue to be a challenge for all services in the coming financial year. The report details the proposed budgets for all services for the coming year. With regard to schools, the proposals have taken into account the pressures reported during the current year with the funding available. This budget will continue to fund schools above their indicator-based assessment for 2018-19 by 2.98 million. Colleagues will also be aware that I have recently written to the Minister for Education in Welsh Government to express my grave concerns concerning the funding made available by Welsh Government to education in this authority. With regards to other services, we have been mindful of the pressures facing social services, both as a result of increasing costs within the independent sector and the increasing demands for services to the ageing population in the Vale, and have therefore provided additional funding for that service. We have also taken into account of the increased pressure on the waste management service and reflected this by reducing some of their savings and reprofiling others of them to enable the service to plan effectively for the changes that have to be made. As part of the budget setting process, we are also required to look at the budget situation for the coming financial years. The report details a shortfall of 3.5 million and 4.3 million in 2019-20 and 2020-21 respectively, and work will be ongoing throughout the next year to identify how this shortfall can be met. When Cabinet considered the draft estimates, it was reported that there would be a 4 million underspend during the current financial year. Of this, 2 million was used as part of the funding for 21st century schools, showing our commitment to that scheme, and the remaining 2 million was placed in the council fund for consideration as part of the final estimates. Within the report, it is detailed that 500,000 will be used to supplement the road resurfacing programme in 2018-19. 500,000 will be placed in the City Deal Reserve to assist in funding for this initiative going forward, and 258,000 is to fund part of the overspend in learning and skills in the current year. There are no proposals to use the remaining sum to support this year's budget, and this will remain in the council fund going forward. The report details the reserves held by this authority, together with the likely drawdown on these in coming years. Between the 31st of March 2018 and the 31st of March 2021, it is estimated that the level of reserves will fall by 28.9 million to 35.4 million. The details of our reserves are shown in Appendix H to this report. The impact on council tax in 2018-19 of this budget is an increase of 3.9%. In summary, therefore, the balancing of the budget for 2018-19 has been difficult due to the competing pressures faced by this authority. However, I believe the budget before you is achievable and will take you to the recommendations as follows, and that is the council approve the budget for 2018-19 at 222.053 million, including a provision of 200,000 for discretionary rate relief to rural shops and post offices and charitable organisations. 2. Approve the budget for 2018-19 as set out in Appendix C, totalling 222.053 million. 3. Approve the recommendations regarding net growth for 2018-19 as set out in Appendix D, and savings for 2018-19 as set out in Appendix E. 4. To set the council tax for 2018-19 for its own purposes, excluding police and town and community council precepts at the levels outlined in the report. And 5. The proposed draft report on education budget and indicator-based assessment at Appendix A be endorsed, and the Director of Learning and Skills make arrangements for it to be forwarded to the School Budget Forum. And I so move.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Neil Moore.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Leader. Thank you, John. This is an austere period, as you rightly said. Times are hard, and setting a budget was never going to be easy. I note that this proposed revenue budget follows on from the previous administration's recommendations not to use any general fund reserve to support the budget next year. I agree with that because the fund will very likely need, I agree with that because the fund will very likely be needed to be used if, and I will say if, there are any shortfalls or emergencies during the coming financial year, or there's a failure to stick to the budget again this year or next year. Indeed, if there was the same financial management of this council next year, which I'm sure could be the case, and I hope it isn't, then there could be some, then that fund would be used as some buffer and would be in place to protect services. Looking at this and previous reports, it's clear to me that the administration has not handled or managed this budget very well at all. This administration has overseen and allowed significant shortfalls in the savings targets. The latest finance reports at the end of January 2018 shows a failure to deliver of £1 million of the £4 million savings that were agreed. To date, 2.289 million has been taken from various reserves, plus the planned 700,000 from the general reserve, as planned in the budget last year. That makes a grand total of almost 3 million of reserves used this year alone. So, where do I stand on this budget report? It's kind of ironic in some respects that in previous councils' budget setting meetings, when I was presenting the budget, yourself, Councillor John Thomas, as leader of the main opposition group, previously stated that his group would be opposing the budget as they did not believe the council tax increase was acceptable. Similar to what you're proposing, I think. That not enough had been done to find savings, and that reshaping services agenda was not delivering the required savings. I can categorically say that this is most definitely the case on your administration's handling of the budgets. I also note that the budget proposals include cost pressures of £8.7 million, but also requires savings of £6.3 million, which means your proposed budget is actually getting more difficult, and and there will be a further, and it will go further into deficit. In real terms, the council will have to find an extra £2.419 million to balance the books as a result, because the cost pressures outweigh the savings. The proposal is therefore to increase council tax by 3.9%, which will cover the funding gap, providing, of course, all the savings are made and there are no extra cost pressures. If not, this council will be in financial trouble. Therefore, the question is whether or not I think the proposals are sound and reasonable. Although the figures can be seen to add up, I consider there to be some flaws in the calculations, particularly in relation to whether or not the savings will be made this year, bearing in mind there are shortfalls this year of over 1 million on the savings of the target of £4 million. With only 75% of the targets achieved, there is no guarantee it will be any different next year or for the following years for that matter. There are also assumptions made for the following years that I consider to be flawed too. The report suggests that the Welsh Government funding will only decrease by 1% or 1.5 million per year for the following 2 years, but that's not correct. Although it's true that for the next year only, 2019-20, the Welsh Government has indicated the reduction will be 1%. However, they have certainly not done so for any subsequent year, and that's clear in the report. So why has the lower 1% reduction been assumed for 2020-21? If the previous assumptions within the medium-term financial plan of 3% is more accurate, it would mean a further reduction in Welsh Government funding of £3 million after next year. It would therefore mean that further savings would need to be found, and the suggested savings in the report for 2021, quoted on page 16 of the report, would rise from £7.8 million to a staggering £10.8 million. You would have to find the extra £3 million. I've also noted the assumption for future increases in council tax contained within the report, because that's also increased from 2.6% to 3% year on year, so that's higher than previously indicated in the medium-term financial plan, but that's fine. It seems to me the figures have been adjusted arbitrarily to make the budget more acceptable. In terms of education, although it's proposed to spend above the Welsh Government's projected spending level IBA, it has been reduced in real terms by 400k when compared to last year's IBA comparison figures. There are also expected savings of £824,000 from schools for the year, but not where they come from. This is at a time when schools are claiming that they do not have enough money anyway, so it will be interesting to see if those same savings come to fruition. I am pleased to see that social services budgets have increased, but clearly they're still going to be under pressure, and it's a time bomb waiting to go off. And that's where I said we could have some emergencies and some extra money coming forward in next year, because we really don't know. Demographics is appalling. In terms of environment and housing, I'm sorry to say that, but they've not achieved their substantial savings this year, and I can't see how this will be achieved without the administration taking control. Although their savings have been reprofiled over several years and others have been deleted, I don't have much confidence that things will recover soon. I'm also extremely concerned about the Cabinet's proposal to move away from co-mingling our recycling service, which we excel at. This could lead to a reduced recycling with added cost for new vehicles, because we don't have the right vehicles, and enforcement would be very difficult, particularly in terms of the black bags. I think you should look outside my garage today, because I put a bag out and it was about 10 or 15, not mine. In fairness, other serious risks of the budget are highlighted in paragraphs 75 to 89, which have to be considered, and I would urge everybody to look at those. However, there's also Appendix E and F, which also show, and I will call this, supposed methods of saving to be made in the next 3 years. but these savings are described so blandly that they're meaningless. What does the savings, when they're termed, they're saying, we're making savings in general services, or through a range of initiatives? What does that actually mean? More ominously, it's also suggested savings through more efficient and effective procurement. Does that mean outsourcing, I wonder? I suspect it does, bearing in mind the previous comments in this chamber. So to sum up, I have grave concerns about the political management of this budget and the ongoing budgets, and I won't be supporting the report that I consider to be ill-conceived and flawed in very many ways.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All that and no alternative, eh? I'll abstain, yeah. Madam Mayor, setting a budget is a series of competing priorities. They need to deliver quality, or at least adequate services in the areas for which we are responsible, whilst also ensuring value for money for the hard-pressed households who contribute to our tax base. That's why it would require exceptional circumstances for me to support an above-inflation council tax rise, such as this one. I'll come to my amendment later on. It's normal for local authorities to overestimate the amount they will require in the financial year and underestimate the amount they will receive. It's also a common trick to increase the base in the first year of a new administration to secure it for the rest of the term, when they will be more generous, hoping that the public will forget those early high rises. Labour increased council tax by almost 5% in their first budget in 2013 and by more than 20% across the 5-year term that they were in control here. Other councils have other ways of doing it. I understand Barry Town just shouts numbers out until you reach agreement between the Labour and the Conservative Party. Of course, I recognise the need for us to raise council tax, although the fact that, as people who were here in the previous meeting heard, we have exceeded estimates for council tax that we raise, as in collect, in each of the past 5 years by an amount similar or greater than our council tax rise. That suggests that the need for these rises is not as great as some politicians and officers have claimed during budget speeches and meetings over the years. Last year, we exceeded estimates in council tax collection by £1.6 million, and the total favourable variance, to use the jargon, was £4 million. That's money we didn't need to take from our households in the Vale to ensure the services that we were delivering. As the leader has just said, of that money, some of that has been reprofiled into different services, but lots of it, £742,000, has not been used for anything. £500,000 has been put into the City Deal reserve, which is not going to be used, according to the programme here, for several years at least. Then there's the state of our overall reserves. The amount actually held in reserves at the end of March 2017 was about £13 million more than the estimated figures given to us in the comparable budget meeting this time last year. That's ignoring school balances and the housing revenue accounts. When there are such discrepancies, how can we be expected to meaningfully debate a £2.6 million increase in council tax? Because the difference between what we've actually got as our bottom line and what we're discussing is substantial. I should also note that some of the reason why our budgets are healthier than they might otherwise be is that the cuts to the revenue support grant by Welsh Government have not been as great as been usually anticipated within our medium-term financial plan. That's because in Assembly politics, Plaid Cymru has gone in and defended local governments, supporting people being just one example, and reduced the cuts being cynically passed on to us by Labour Government, who are happy to fund NHS services but not local government. Ask Debbie Wilcox. I recognise the problem faced by any ruling group in the Vale. On the one hand, they spend their time telling us our services are wonderful and a leading light amongst councils. On the other, we are on the point of ruin if we don't hike up council tax above inflation to satisfy our corporate bottom line. You can't have it both ways, and crying wolf isn't helpful. I'm a school governor. I recognise the difficulties of ensuring a balanced budget with the current amount of money that we have. And with all due respect to the Cabinet Member and to others who are working on this, if someone like Alan Cairns, the Secretary of State for Wales, really wants to make a difference to schools in the Vale, then getting his government to end austerity and properly fund public services will be far more useful to us than another petition. Similarly, our provision for bad debts and problems because of the introduction of universal credit, something that I have raised on several occasions tonight. We have a Conservative council where throughout the budget proposals we have mitigating areas about the negative effects of Conservative government policy. You couldn't really make it up, could you? They spend all their we elect them up there to go and do these things to hurt us here. I'd like to think you'd have a little more influence over the Secretary of State of Wales than you've shown so far. Madam Mayor, in previous years, Council has allocated 1.5 million of reserves from the General Fund in 2016 in order to mitigate the effects of council tax rises. Last year it was £700,000. Of course, as I pointed out, the amount we actually took in was more than £2 million above our estimates in that first year, 16-17, and £1.6 million last year. But there's none this year. The Conservatives are therefore transferring the full amount...
You have 1 minute left, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. They're transferring the full amount onto hard-pressed taxpayers rather than seeking to use our 70 million or so of funds to mitigate this. I said, Madam Mayor, that I would not support a council tax increase above inflation except in extraordinary circumstances, and these are not extraordinary circumstances. It might be raining, but it isn't extraordinary. Plaid Cymru proposed a council tax of 3% in line increase of 3% in line with CPI inflation. That's the figure that you've also used as a council earlier on for increases in our council tax rents. A bandy household would therefore pay £1,176.64, funded by £603,000 from the General Reserve. I've already indicated that we took substantially more than that £1.6 million than that amount last year, and I would expect that we would do so once again. I therefore like to move the amendment, which is I believe, page 16 of the report, and the item goes to item 2 of the paper when I can find it, which is to introduce.
Councillor Johnson.
I'm moving my amendment. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and that would be £603,000 taken from reserves in item 2, which would reduce that balance in the grand total accordingly, and under item 4, that would be for bandy to be £1,176.64. With all other areas rebalanced accordingly as a percentage of that in ninths.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Gwyn John. I'm sorry, Councillor. You are seconded. You're going to speak on this, on seconding it, are you?
Yes, please. Yes. Thank you. I would happily second that amendment. I note, as previously stated tonight, that across the aspects of housing that we have control over, there's a 3% rise. And I also note 2 significant attacks upon our council expenditure as set out in the council report. The first has already been stated tonight, universal credit, and we know where that's coming from, that attack upon our residents. And secondly, on page 10 of this report, it actually goes on about the rise in inflation due to considerable uncertainty on the effects of Britain's exit from the European Union, and inflation had started to increase during this year. Our council leadership certainly know how to kick ourselves in our own backsides on this one. These attacks on our residents should not be added to by us as a council by putting in an overinflation rise in council tax this year. I support 3% and all the necessary measures to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gwyn John.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Welcome to my world, Councillor Thomas, because last year at this time we were all shouting out about a 0%. 0%, yes, Councillor Johnson, 0%. No increase in the council tax. We don't need an increase. We've got plenty. And now we suddenly change, because simply we all know it was all about electioneering, playing to the gallery. The world is tough, and you found it out. You really found it out this year, and it's getting tougher. Let's make no mistake about it. We have got to really look at ourselves big time, because there's less money coming from the Welsh Government. Where are we going to go, and what's going to happen? Councillor Moore mentioned about many of the projects that haven't gone ahead, simply because we haven't got the resources, the people to do the work. In the Cabinet report, I think it's round about item 91 thereabouts, it refers to job losses. And now that's what concerns me. The budget tonight, you know, is a really tight budget. It's a really tight council tax. Nobody likes council taxes, but let's look at the real picture that's facing us. We're shortly going to have a tax from the Welsh Government. You'll have your normal income tax, you'll have your council tax, And now there's talk, let's be fair, we're talking about reshaping services and sending more down to town councils to manage. And what's going to happen? Their taxes are going to have to go up to meet the demands. This is a tight world we're living in, and there's no way for playing. Quite honestly, I am very concerned about the level of the council tax, but I'm also very concerned about how we're going to address this, because there's a lot of people going to lose their jobs in the long term. Apart from the, you know, we talk about many people going early and what have you. I'm on that committee, and the number of people that are going, experienced people. But this is a serious matter, and I'm very concerned about where we're going. And quite honestly, whilst, you know, people out there, you know, daydream believer Alan Carnes talks about 0% increases, this is the real world. There can't be load cuts, but at the same time, there's loads of people out there struggling. Loads of people on fixed income struggling. The biggest mistake was ever happened was Mr. Carnes' department. What did they do? They brought in police commissioners, and every year our police budgets go up, and subsequently the people out there have got to pay more and more and more when it's not needed. I agree totally that we cannot go lower than what you've named tonight to 3.9. For me, Councillor Johnson talks about 3% and he talks about the Welsh Government. Well, first of all, if I was Councillor Johnson, I would talk to my leader, Leanne Wood, who plays a part in the budget. Because the Labour government cannot run this government without the support of Plaid. So it works a merry-go-round, you know. It's a spin around. But I am very concerned about the budget and where we're going. It's a tight year ahead. And by golly, that's where we're not getting work done because we're not having the bodies to do it. And I agree with Councillor Moore, commingling has been a great success with this council. But we got a gun to our heads now from the Welsh Government to go blueprint. So where do we go? You know, it's not an easy decision. And you guys up front now are feeling the pinch. Thank you.
Councillor Moore, is it a point of explanation?
No, I was asking, if this is an amendment, then I'd like to speak to the amendment.
Okay, it's fine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The people of the Vale of Glamorgan have repeatedly stated that they do not want cuts to services. It's an overwhelming view. And a 3.9% budget in the current climate appears reasonable if we're to protect services. I'm pleased that note has been taken of comments from the Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee. The committee was concerned that the pressures on the budget from additional learning needs and SEN education hadn't been quantified, and that remains the case. But over the past few years, we've listened as Councillor Thomas has voted against budgets of 3.9 or even 2.8%. His reasons were that there were not enough cuts being made, that there needed to be a more radical saving strategy, and that more services should be outsourced to the private sector. In a recent meeting, the webcam shows Councillor Thomas supporting austerity and trying to lay the blame for budget cuts at the door of Welsh Government, saying that it's their fault because they divide the pot. The reality, however, is that austerity has cost Wales in real terms 1.1 billion, or 7% of its budget since 2010-11. You can't champion austerity and then claim to care about the cuts that you're having to make. In echoing Councillor Moore's comments, I'd like to highlight a few specific areas of concern in this budget. Firstly, education funding. In the last full council meeting, Councillor Thomas stated that although the funding was put in place by a Conservative Welsh Secretary, the Welsh Government should have changed it by now. But the school's funding formula used by the last Conservative administration actually used similar criteria, and they remained until it was reviewed and changed by working with schools over an 18-month period. That's how we've got the current funding formula. Another area of concern is procurement. I'm concerned that the Council's narrow focus on procurement will result in contracts moving away from local businesses to large multinationals. Most of us are aware of the recent collapse of Carillion, but for me the most important aspect is the impact on the local economy. We've built up successful business incubators and start-up business support, but they will fail if they've got no access to public sector contracts. As previously stated, the people of the Vale of Glamorgan feel or say that they do not want service cuts, but want the council to develop new services that would generate revenue. They seem to be voted against by that administration. They're supportive of community groups and organisations taking over non-statutory services. But as hard as I look, I can't find any evidence that they support the privatisation of public services, which seems to be a theme going through this administration. So I have little confidence in the ability of this administration to deliver this budget, and therefore I feel unable to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marnie.
Thank you. I know that we all appreciate the problems and funding and balancing the books. I've heard much mention of austerity here from my left and from my right here. I think it's worth highlighting that every single political party that's represented here in this chamber tonight, other than the Lantford First, and I've no idea of their foreign aid policy, insistent at national level that we donate £13 billion last year in foreign aid, in £10 billion in foreign aid to the European Union, and yet they're squealing and whining about austerity. Our national government has to borrow £25 billion a year this year to fund that, also next year. Thankfully, the following year we'll be out of the EU, but I strongly suspect the way Theresa May's going, we'll probably be paying more being out of the EU than those who are actually in it. So the sheer irony of expecting our residents to subsidise dozens, if not scores of countries around the world and their residents, while we're arguing here about raising our council tax. Why are they subsidising them? So how dare you have the cheek, while you're demanding we give billions and billions of pounds away to the rest of the world, about rises here. What a cheek.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't want to go into details about the wider issues. I just want to make a plea for one, and that's the youth service, which is being decimated under this budget, and to my mind it indicates this administration's attitude to most things. They understand the cost of everything but the value of none. Youth service represents a device, a means, an opportunity to engage with, particularly with children from more difficult backgrounds and with more complex needs within our community, and serves to help divert them from perhaps more criminal futures, producing further costs in the future. Cutting youth service now will add to the youth offending service demands in the future. It's short-sighted, it's self-defeating, and it's absolutely wrong. And I would beg this administration to re-examine their attitude towards the youth service and give it the funding it needs.
Councillor Johnson, could you reiterate your amendment, please?
Certainly, Madam Mayor. So this is in the report, page, I believe it's page 16, is that right? So, resolved, Cabinet recommends the Council the following. Is that the correct set of papers? The following with having several sets of papers relating to different meetings is you have to try and work out which is the final one.
Yep.
I don't want to start amending the wrong page. That would be strange. Yep.
Page
Okay.
16.
So under item 2, which is on page 15 and goes over the page to page 16, then there should be an item marked. I can't remember what it was last year. Was that returned from general fund with a bracket £603,000 under it, and therefore the grand total would be reduced by £600,000 as well, £603,000. And the council tax, just item 4 then, the council tax for 2018-19, count band D being 1176.64, £1,176.64, with all other numbers being recalculated accordingly to the formula used for that calculation. Is that clear?
Can you repeat the first bit, please?
The first bit is under item 2, budget, which is the heading that says budgets for 2018-19 as set out in Appendix C attached to the report and the totals set out below be approved. And I'm putting a change, which is after general policy. There is traditionally an item on this budget line here, which is taken from general reserves. And that should say £603,000. Or brackets £603,000, with a recalculation of the grand total as a result, being £603,000 less than it currently is. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mark.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a number of concerns about this budget. Councillor Thomas eloquently spoke with a great deal of passion about the decimation of the youth service. I mean, I've heard in that report that went to Cabinet, which I know is also going to the Scrutiny Committee, that there's a proposed closure to close the youth centre in Climate Major. I'm concerned. We've got no youth centre in Penarth. We haven't had it for a number of years now. We got barely nothing there at all. And I'm very fortunate in my ward we got a very good provision to a certain extent in Alfred Avenue Church, which I campaigned for. And I'm clearly going to defend that and hopefully increase, because I know as a teacher of young people how important it is to engage with young people and to communicate and get on with them and find out their needs and wants. But also, I'm also aware that there is antisocial behaviour. And I don't want more antisocial behaviour. And clearly none of us do. So I do like the leader and the relevant cabinet member, Councillor Penrose, to consider that element of the budget. The other concern I have is visible services. I would call these visible services the pick and mix. Because if you live in flats, you will still continue to mix your recycling. But if you live in houses, you've got to pick them out. Now, I know there's consultation after the decision recommended by Cabinet on that option, but that seems to be like the one way round to me. Surely you should consult before the budget, not after the budget. That seems rather strange. Because imagine you do all the consultation and it turns out that actually you don't do that in the end. Where else are you going to find the savings? I don't know, because you haven't suggested anywhere else where you can find the savings. So clearly, I know that's going to the Environment Scrutiny Committee, and I will be there. And I will speak about that, because I've got huge concern for that, and so a lot of my residents as well in the Stanwell ward. So clearly, I will be not supporting this budget. Thank you.
Councillor Moore with the right to reply to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to talk to the amendment. It wasn't unexpected. Indeed, it was expected that Councillor Johnson is doing what he usually does and attempting to change the recommendation, but once again, suggesting the use of general fund reserves to reduce the proposed council tax rise. I have opposed such a suggestion in the past at budget meetings, budget setting meetings for good reasons, and I'll do so again tonight. In previous years, the last and at the last council meeting, the amount of council tax collected had been raised, as it was a long time ago. And the query about whether or not our estimates collection rate was reasonable. I note, and I said it earlier, that the leader acknowledged the fact that it was set at a predicted collection rate of 97.5% last year. I did that because it rose from 97% the following 2 years. In 1915-16 to 2015-16 even, it was a 97% collection rate, and we had a surplus of £1.9 million. The year after, we continued, which was 16-17, we continued with the 97% collection tax. That actually rose to 2.3. Now, before that, there was a suggestion we were going to up the collection rate because there was a marked difference between 15-16 and 16-17, 1.9 million to 2.3. We decided to up the rate to 97.5, and lo and behold, this year there was a surplus of 1.6 million pounds. So it had the marked effect of reducing the surplus. But by having a surplus and by doing so, there is a possibility that by doing so, you make sure that there is a possibility that there's a surplus and not a deficit. And that's important because you are running a budget. And if you're running the budget, you have to make sure you've got the money in the budget to actually pay for the things you want to produce. Which would mean, and if you didn't, it would actually mean cuts to services or to jobs to cover the shortfall, something that should always be avoided. So, as far as I'm concerned, yes, you set the rate at a collectible level which you think is reasonable, but you always hope, and it is always a hope, that you are going to have a surplus. Now, for the last several years, we've thought that universal credit was going to come in, and it hadn't until now. And John, you made the point earlier on, you think it could come in. And if it does come in, and it comes in at the rate we think it might be, 97.5% still not going to be enough to collect all the money. So we can't afford to reduce it. And to quote something that you said at the last meeting, I would much prefer to be in surplus at the end of the year rather than deficit. And I totally agree.
Leader? Would you like to sum up, Leader? Amendment first, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, as Councillor Moore said, we all guessed where Councillor Johnson was going to come from tonight.
Not really.
We didn't know exactly what you were going to come up with as a percentage for the increase, but I think we knew that something was coming along. There's no point me rehearsing what Councillor Moore said about the council tax collection rates. As it's been said many times, and I did say in the last meeting, and I'll say it again, I'd much rather at the end of the year have a surplus than a deficit, because with a deficit, where are we going to go from there? You always go on about an over collection. All we're doing is collecting the money that we're owed. If we didn't collect the money we're owed, it's not fair on the rest of the residents in the Vale that actually do pay the council tax. So I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of, the fact that we collect more than is. Sorry, you. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of in the fact that we're collecting the council tax that we're owed. One point which you made, I find my notes, is that you've chosen 3% as being the CPI inflation rate, and that's what you think the council tax should be. You failed to take into account the 0.4% reduction in our funding from Welsh Government, which would actually add another 1% onto that. So that brings you back virtually to where I am with 3.9% of the council tax. So I definitely resist the amendment which you've proposed tonight.
Good.
So do we vote on the amendment now?
Can you just read the amendment out, please?
As I wrote it down, the amendment was a change on page 15, recommendation 2, adding a reference to 603,000 to be taken from the general reserve, and then a knock-on effect as a consequence of that on recommendation 4 to change the amount against the Band D council tax from 118692 to 117664 with a recalculation of the other bands.
All those in favour for the amendment, please show. All those against? That's defeated. Leader, would you like to sum up?
Find my way back through the pages on that. Okay. Can I just start by saying that I was always taught when I was younger that if you get something wrong, you should admit it. And this time last year, I probably wasn't expecting to be standing in this place this time this year. And I fully admit that I probably got it wrong when I supported Councillor Johnson's call for a 0% rise in council tax. So let's get that out of the way before we start. And it would have made it a lot easier for us tonight if you put it up by a bit more last year, but we won't go there. As Councillor Moore suggested, times are hard, and we do need to keep what we can in the council fund as a buffer. We don't know what's going to arise throughout the year. We do know that there's a hole in the budget for next year and the year after that we need to find more savings for, and the savings are getting harder and harder to find. There are shortfalls in some of the savings targets, and the main reason for that is because the targets have been very stretching, and if you don't make them stretching, you're not going to make the savings, but if you do make them stretching, sometimes you're not going to achieve the savings and they need to be reprofiled. And I'm quite pleased to see that Councillor Moore looks as if he looked at the webcast from last year as I did. They quote me on virtually everything I said. But he did acknowledge the budget is getting more difficult, and I think it's quite noticeable that that's the case. But we are confident that we will be able to achieve most of the savings or go a long way towards them, and that they are stretching but achievable. On the Welsh Government predictions for the funding, yeah, we've been told is 1% reduction for next year. We've put in 1% for the year after, but it is just a best estimate. There's no knowing where that's going to be, and further savings do need to be found. He said the education budget has reduced in real terms, which is probably the case, but then so have nearly all the budgets within the council, and we are pleased to be able to support education to virtually 3 million over IBA, as was done by the previous administration. He mentioned the point that environment and housing haven't achieved their savings. Well, I think that I've already made the point of how stretching those savings are, and most of them have been reprofiled rather than got rid of. And the mention of the cabinet proposals for not doing commingled recycling, I can assure you it's not a cabinet proposal. It's only a cabinet proposal because it's been forced upon us by Welsh Government, who have basically said that there's no money coming, no waste management grants coming to this council if we do not go down their blueprint. We're as disappointed as everyone else is at that, as the Vale has traditionally had one of the best recycling rates in Wales, and you know, we'd hope to keep it up there, but it's going to be very difficult with the blueprint, and we've got a very big job to educate the sorry? Got a very big job to educate the residents of the Vale, and to increase the recycling rates with curbside sorting. And savings, will we be outsourcing? I don't know. We will look at everything, and I'm not saying we'll definitely be outsourcing, but we will look at all opportunities to save money. Councillor Johnson mentioned the early high rises in council tax, and then reducing it towards the end. The way things are looking going forward, I don't think that will be the case. It's not an early high rise, it's a council tax rise which balances the budget. And looking at the future predictions, don't see it being the fact that this is a high one and it's going to be getting lower. Hopefully we can keep council tax at a reasonable level so that we can provide the services that everybody in the Vale relies upon. We've already done the over collection of council tax, and the fact that there's a £4 million surplus at the end of the year on the budget. £4 million on a £222 million budget, I think, is about 2%. It's pretty close to break even, really, and not far off going the other way. So I'm happy to live with a £4 million excess at the end of the financial year. He said reserves, always mentions the state of the reserves at this time and then at the close of the accounts. Reserves do fluctuate. They're there to be used when they're necessary, and that's just the way it is. Sometimes reserves need to be used, and when they are, it does make differences. But your proposals to use, you're looking surprised, your proposals to use the council fund to prop up the council tax.
Haven't we just debated this?
Yeah. Because I've got the right to respond, and that's what I'm doing.
Summing up.
You had 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, your proposals to use money from the council fund to cut the council tax just doesn't add up. It just makes a bigger hole in the budget, and by the end of a 5-year term, there'll be no reserves left. So I think I won't say any more than that about it, obviously, because you don't want to hear it. Councillor John mentioned welcome to his world. Yes, Gwyn, I am in your world, and I've already talked about that. And as I said, I didn't last year propose the 0%, but I did support the 0% amendment. And I can assure you that we will, in everything we do in trying to make savings, we will be trying to keep redundancies to a minimum, especially compulsory redundancies. I don't think any of us here want to see any officers made compulsory redundant. Liz mentioned that we don't want, the residents of the Vale don't want services cut, and I totally agree with that, and we're doing our very best to maintain services. And she did thankfully agree that 3.9% does appear reasonable. She said I supported austerity. I don't think I really supported austerity. What I said was there was an awful lot of savings have been made due to austerity in the early years. But like everyone else here, I would certainly like to see the end of it now. It's been going on long enough, and I don't think would be any dispute in that. But a lot of huge savings have been made, as you know, over the initial years of austerity, and probably without it they wouldn't have been made. And procurement, I don't think we wouldn't want to see us moving away from local suppliers to national suppliers, but I think it's imperative that we do actually look at procurement to see what savings can be made. As far as Kevin's point was concerned about foreign aid, it's not in my gift to deal with foreign aid, but actually running the Vale of Glamorgan Council is, so I think we'll stick with that tonight rather than looking at what national government's proposals on foreign aid are. Neil mentioned the youth service, and our proposals for the youth service are to make the youth service fit for the future, but we will be taking on board any of the comments from scrutiny committees before coming to any decision. Mark basically made the same comments, and so I'd reiterate what I just said. And you also mentioned the blueprint, and I've already said that the Welsh Government have basically said there's no more money coming to this authority for waste management grants if we don't follow the blueprint. So unfortunately we're pushed down that route, although we very much regret it. And that, Madam Mayor,
Thank you, Leader. All those in favour for the final proposal for the revenue budget? Thank you. All those against? Thank you. Any abstentions? Thank you. It's carried. Vale of Glamorgan Public Services Board Draft Wellbeing Plan. Leader?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of the report is to seek Council approval of the Public Services Board's Draft Wellbeing Plan, to enable the Public Services Board to publish the plan by the 4th of May, as per the requirements of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015. The PSB has agreed 4 wellbeing objectives which provide a framework for the plan, and they are to enable people to get involved, participate in their local communities and shape local services, to reduce poverty and tackle inequalities linked to deprivation, to give children the best start in life, and to protect, enhance and value our environment. The draft plan details how the wellbeing objectives have been set, proposed actions, how the plan fits with other partnership plans and strategies, and the outcomes of the PSB that the PSB wants to achieve. The actions in the draft plan have been discussed at length across the PSB and reflect where partners think their collective action can add the greatest value in contributing to the 7 national wellbeing goals for Wales. Consultation on the draft plan has been extensive and undertaken, and overall there was a great deal of support for the wellbeing objectives and the content of the plan. In order for the plan to be published in May, each of the partners must now take the plan through their respective approval mechanisms. The plan must therefore be approved by Council prior to publication in May. So I commend the plan to Council. I hope that you will approve it. As I say, it's had very extensive consultation, and I think everybody's had a fair chance to have an input into this. So move.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Guess who wants to speak?
Councillor Johnson?
Wow, fancy that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Leader, for presenting this highly important document with the Public Services Board. I've had reason, with a different hat on, to look at the draft wellbeing plans from a large number of authorities and public service boards across Wales, and I'm pretty sure this is one of the best that there is. So I'm very pleased with the objectives that are being set. I'll be interested to see how we scrutinise that from the Corporate Resources and Performance section of the committee of this council, because a lot of the ideas are very well-meaning and quite lofty, as you might expect coming out of the way that the Act has been drafted. So it'll be interesting to see how the implementation actually works. One specific point that I will raise, and obviously we've had discussions about the Future Generations Commissioner, because of course she's one of the people who's questioned Natural Resources Wales, something that wasn't, I think, perhaps discussed in much detail earlier as maybe should have been. But there's also a question of alignment between this plan and other initiatives and strategies that are taking place. And as I raised in the Corporate Resources and Performance Committee that looked at this, one of the issues is that none of the consultees, for example, was a Welsh language organisation. Now, when that is a key part of both Welsh Government strategy, the 1 million speakers by 2050, which is also the same time frame as the Public Services Board's long-term goals, and considering that it's one of the key elements to the Future Generations Act, that's quite an important omission, and I would hope that the leader will report that back to the Public Services Board in the next meeting, so that they can fully consider how they best engage with Welsh speakers and how they will promote it in the context of government policy as part of this plan going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour? Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the compliment, Councillor Johnson. I don't claim it to be my plan in any way, although I am proud to be chairman of the Public Services Board. I will certainly take your views back to the Public Services Board and
now you can
discuss it there. Thank you.
All those in favour? Okay. Moving on to agenda item 12, to set the council tax 2018-19. Leader?
Sorry, I think everybody's had an amended version of page 5 with the year altered from 2016-17 to 2018-19. I don't know what happened to 2017-18, but there we are. The council, having agreed the budget for this council for the coming year, thankfully, the council must now agree the council tax for the coming year. In doing this, the following is taken into account: the funding required by this council to meet the budget already agreed, the funding required by the town and community councils, which have all met and determined their funding requirements for the coming financial year, the funding required by the Police and Crime Commissioner for the coming financial year, and the funding required by the Fire Authority for the coming financial year. The table in this report details the council tax for all property bandings in the Vale, taking into account all of the above. And I so move.
Second.
All those in favour? Against? Abstention? Carried, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 13, which is A to D. It's just for noting. Moving on then to, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 14, which is to receive questions and answers pursuant to sections. You want to afterwards, yeah. Question 1 is from Councillor Gray to the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Gray. A detailed report on the revised waste management strategy and the future collection arrangements for waste and recycling was considered by Cabinet on Monday the 19th of February this year. Subject to Welsh Government capital funding and the outcome of a comprehensive public consultation exercise, the Council intends to introduce a revised strategy that increases recycling sufficient to meet and exceed the statutory recycling target of 70% by 2024-2025. New arrangements proposed include a change to source-separated dry recycling collections, reducing the amount of contaminated recyclates, and also a limit on the number of black bags that can be placed out for collection, driving up the waste elements currently being placed in black bags that can be recycled. We intend to raise awareness of the recycling options available and the amount of materials generally left in black bags that can be recycled. And we have already started a social media campaign when we are seeking volunteers with various size families to take part in a What's in Your Bin experiment. This will be followed by further educational and support initiatives prior to the black bag restrictions being implemented. We will be seeking the views of the public on what they consider to be the potential problems of the change via our consultation exercise, which will commence in March 2018. I note that Councillor Wilson, in the debate on the budget earlier this evening, criticised the fact that we were proposing 2 lots of recycling, curb separated and co-mingled. But I think the next paragraph will give a little bit of an explanation to him and also to Councillor Gray. We know that flats and apartments, or where communal bin stores are located, will be challenging. So initially we intend to keep these on a co-mingled collection until a suitable alternative that effectively separates recycling can be established. So I hope you will appreciate that we're doing this in a gentle manner until we've got a suitable alternative, and of course we will be consulting on it.
Thank you. Question 2 is from... Sorry, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Over the Christmas period, residents in my ward and across Penarth found that their recycling had not been collected, with the streets littered with uncollected curbside recycling. Can you reassure the residents of Penarth this won't happen again?
Thank you, Councillor Gray. The leader talked about honesty a bit earlier in this evening, so can I assure you that we've learned lessons on the level of resources required to deal with the Christmas period recycling, because obviously we had insufficient at that stage. And I can assure you we will take all steps to try and prevent this happening in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Thank you, Councillor Cox. So question 2 from Councillor Gray to Councillor Cox.
The parking of heavy commercial vehicles, that's HGVs exceeding 7.5 tonnes, on the footway contravenes Section 19 of the Road Traffic Act 1988 and can be enforced by a civil enforcement officer. However, no such prohibition exists for pavement parking for similar vehicles or private cars outside of London. It exists in London but nowhere else in the country. Rule 244 of the Highway Code states you must not park partially or wholly on the pavement in London and should not do so elsewhere unless signs permit it. Parking on the pavement can obstruct and seriously inconvenience pedestrians, people in wheelchairs or with visual impairments, and people, of course, with prams or pushchairs. Somewhat paradoxically, it is an offence to drive onto the pavement outside of London, whether the intention to park or not, and this is a criminal offence only enforceable by the police. Currently, the only way that pavement parking can be dealt with in the Vale is under this legislation, or legislation governing obstruction and dangerous parking, all of which generally requires the police to take action, to take whatever action is necessary. It is, however, becoming significantly difficult for the police to take any enforcement action. In such cases, as the threshold for proving such actions is considerable. Now, the Council is generally restricted to enforcing areas where there are already defined parking restrictions over the particular stretch of highway, identified by road markings such as double or single yellow lines or zigzags, and supported by an appropriate road traffic order. Since March 2017, the Council has been promoting a Park Tidy campaign, utilising social media to encourage drivers to park responsibly and safely. Part of this campaign is aimed at addressing inconsiderate parking, such as parking on pavements and footways, where pedestrian access is subsequently restricted. Members of the public or elected members are able to follow the links on our website to support such parking incidents, and these will be investigated to establish what action can be taken. Further promotion of this campaign is parked in the near future. So I think my advice to you is, if there are specific areas where there are major problems with people parking on the footway, report it to our officers, and we will consider then whether we need to paint double yellow lines or place things like no parking notices, or no parking on the pavement notices, which then we can enforce with our civil parking officers.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Gray? Agenda item 3 is from Councillor Marnie to the Cabinet Member for Learning and Culture.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Marnie, for your question. Let me first start by providing you and other members of the Chamber with some insight into the scale of the problem. The budgeted expenditure per pupil in 2017 and 2018 is at the same level it was in 2012-2013, when considering the cost of inflation and increases in superannuation, in addition to the new apprenticeship levy, there is significantly less funding available per pupil now than there was in 2012. The gap between funding levels per pupil in the Vale of Glamorgan and the national average has increased by £163 per pupil. In 2015-2016, pupils in the Vale of Glamorgan were funded at £443 below the Welsh average, and in 2016-2017 the Vale of Glamorgan pupils were funded at £606 below the Welsh average. The gap between the lowest and highest funded authorities in terms of funding per pupil has increased each year, 23% in 2014-2015, 27% in 2017-18. This equates to £1,360 per pupil in 2017-2018. Surely it's not right that every single pupil in Ceredigion receives £1,360 more per year than a pupil in the Vale of Glamorgan. The Vale of Glamorgan Council has funded education services above the indicator-based assessment, the IBA, since April 2013, and yet funding per pupil remains the lowest across Wales. Other authorities have funded education below IBA, and yet pupils in those authorities still receive higher funding than pupils in the Vale of Glamorgan. This leads us to believe there is something inherently wrong with the Welsh Government, IBA and SSA formally. So what have we done about it? Over a number of months, the Vale of Glamorgan, in conjunction with the Vale Schools Budget Forum, have sought clarity from Welsh Government on the methodology applied at national level to local authority IBA calculations that result in such apparent inequalities in the levels of funding for students across Wales to the detriment of pupils in the Vale of Glamorgan. Welsh Government state that the aim of the IBA, their method of demonstrating their indicative spending level for education, is to strike a balance between the four principles that underpin the education funding formula, namely equity, stability, clarity and relevance. A formula which results in pupils in the Vale of Glamorgan being funded at the lowest level in Wales, and one which has seen a gap between the Vale's funding per pupil and the average funding per pupil widen year on year, is anything but equitable, stable, relevant and clear. The draft revenue budget for 2018-2019 funds education at £3 million above IBA. But given the continued reduction in local government funding, this is clearly not a sustainable strategy for the future. In view of this, we are committed to challenging the continued use of the current formula, aspects of which use data from the 1991 census. Having not had particularly helpful replies to our various correspondence over recent months and no commitment whatsoever that the inequality of funding would even be looked at, let alone addressed, we have taken the unprecedented step to alert parents about the low level of funding our schools receive. Many of the parents have already contacted the Cabinet Secretary for Education directly to challenge this inequality, and at the start of this week there were close to nearly 200 separate letters or emails that have been sent to the Cabinet Secretary on the issue, although I would say that these are only the ones we are aware of. And to sum up, she's definitely not amused about it.
Supplementary, Councillor Marnie.
Yeah, thank you for that tale of woe. We have 5 Assembly members representing this area in the shambles often referred to as the Welsh Assembly. Since the Vale issued a statement highlighting the underfunding, or gap in funding should I say, have any of them contacted you, or any, for that matter, any other national politician, and do you feel that any help from these national figures could assist you in redressing this yawning chasm?
Thank you. We'll continue to highlight the impact of the unfair funding system has on our schools at every opportunity. This is not just about funding the Vale receives through the settlement, but also encompasses specific grants for education in schools, many of which are equally questionable. We are currently raising issues about the loss of the Minority Ethnic Achievement Grant. But again, despite a number of requests for information and clarity, answers are not provided. To bring you to your point about AMs and MPs, an invitation has been extended to all the local AMs and MPs to seek a meeting this Friday, the 2nd of March, to brief them on the situation and to seek their support in lobbying Welsh Government to carry out fundamental review of the funding of education and schools in Wales. We've had a good response to our invitation, but it's extremely worrying and disappointing to us, and no doubt head teachers, governors and parents, that the local elected assembly member for the Vale of Glamorgan constituency decided not to attend this cross-political, cross-party briefing. I would also at this opportunity like to extend an invitation to the leaders of all groups in this council to attend this meeting so that we can take a unilateral approach to Welsh Government in claiming this additional funding. And thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Moving on to question number 4 from Dr Johnson to the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Planning.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. The Council addresses vacancies in retail centres in many ways. Its day-to-day maintenance of the town centre contributes to a healthy retail environment, supplemented by, for instance, our marketing and events programmes, including the ice rink last year and the Christmas market delivered by traders and funded in part by the Council. We work closely in partnership with the traders in Holton Road and their requests. We are currently trialling the use of underused taxi bays for additional customer parking. This was agreed through the Town Centre Forum, which was established to improve communication and inform initiatives. The Town Centre Development Officer is in routine contact with the traders, assisting with issues as they arise. For instance, a presentation was recently arranged for traders on the benefits and pitfalls of a business improvement district, which could generate additional revenue for promoting and improving the town centre. At the request of the traders, further information is being gathered by the Council and a further presentation is planned. In respect of investment in the Castle Land renewal area, which ended in 2017 and saw direct council investment in commercial premises and residential property facelifts in Upper Holton Road. Highway signage improvements also. More than £2 million was invested in Holton Road under this programme, with 34 new shop fronts installed, 6 vacant shops converted to residential use. Some 7 new businesses have moved into these properties. This comprehensive investment programme has transformed the area. In the main retail centre, the ongoing Holton Road grant programme encourages property owners to improve the external fabric of buildings, bringing empty shop units back into beneficial use, and to improve access to vacant or underutilised upper floors to encourage conversion to residential accommodation. Up to 75% grants are available through this programme. The project involves engagement with local businesses, landlords and property agents. Since the grant programme was launched in 2014, 5 schemes have been completed. One at 157 Holton Road, one at Regent Street, 86 Holton Road, 50 Holton Road and 80 Holton Road respectively. As a result of the grant funding, the empty shop units at 86 and 80 Holton Road are now occupied by tenants. A further 5 schemes are currently on site at 3 Thompson Street, 51 Holton Road, 12 to 14 Holton Road, 60 Holton Road and 74 Holton Road. Following the completion of these works, it is hoped that the empty shop units at 3 Thompson Street, 60 Holton Road, 74 Holton Road will soon be occupied by tenants. Further projects are in the pipeline for the coming year, and the Council have recently been successful in securing another £80,000 in grant from Welsh Government to extend the programme.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much for that response. There's a lot of very welcome news in there. I think I have a particular question which is around the vacant shop premises, because there are a number of quite sticky properties that are on the Holton Road area which have been left empty for quite some time, and it's unclear what those reasons from the outside what those reasons might be. I was wondering if it's possible for the cabinet member to arrange meetings with whether the landlord, to make a register of these sticky properties, meet with the landlord, or delegate somebody to meet with the landlord and identify just why these properties are still empty despite so much of the work that's going on, as he's already identified.
Certainly, I'd be more than willing to look into that. I would request your assistance, possibly, as well, if you've got any contacts or help. But yes, I'll certainly look into that and do my best to make contact and see why these premises aren't moving and do what we can to get them moved and get them occupied.
Thank you. Moving on to question 5, which is from Councillor Johnson to the Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. The question is on transport priorities. The Head of Service of Neighbourhood Services and Transport advised all members earlier this month that the Regional Transport Authority is currently consulting on its draft outline regional transport strategy, which can be viewed on the Council's website. The closing date for this consultation is the 23rd of March 2018. This outline strategy proposes a way forward in prioritising transport interventions and identifies a number of top priorities for improving GVA for the region and wider afield. Appendix 2 of the draft outline regional transport strategy lists a number of schemes which the CCRTA is in the process of developing as a prioritised and fully appraised long-term multimodal capital programme. And that's the Cardiff Capital Region. So, at the first step, existing rail, bus, highway, park and ride and access proposals have been gathered. These will be reviewed and evaluated against City Deal and Welsh Government targets. In the draft list for review for the Vale of Glamorgan are a number of schemes, including rail extension to Cardiff Airport, new stations at Cardiff Airport, St Athan and Junction 34, bus priority schemes for Penarth to Cardiff and Airport Barry to Cardiff, bus/rail interchanges or improvements at Barry, Barry Docks, Barry Island and Penarth, active travel access to railway stations, A4232 improvements making better use, and Junction 34 to Cardiff Airport, improved road, cycle and walking corridors, and the St Athan Northern Access Road. Finally, it is important to note that the Cardiff Capital Region Cabinet agreed last week the first 5-year business plan for the City Deal. This will be reported to Cabinet on the 19th of March, and I know arrangements are in hand to convene a special meeting of Council before the end of March so that this business plan can be debated.
Supplementary, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think probably most people know where this question's going. The outline regional transport strategy, as published, includes 202 different suggestions, 18 of them in the Vale of Glamorgan. Many of them I would welcome, including the multimodal hub at Barry Docks. The one glaring omission is the Dinas Powys bypass. Where does that sit within regional transport strategy? And how is this going to be affected by this consultation? What can we best do to ensure that other council leaders and cabinet members are listening to us?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I guess that the Dinas Powys bypass would probably come out of the question, and the preferred transport solution for Dinas Powys yet to be determined. You're well aware of the stage 2 well tag process that's going on at the moment. The consultation process enables anyone to comment on the strategy and suggest schemes to be assessed which are currently not included. Irrespective of this, we have taken the opportunity to raise the awareness of the Dinas Powys bypass proposals with colleagues across the Cardiff Capital Region. And we have also done the same in relation to the need to investigate improved links from Penarth to Cardiff Bay.
Thank you, Leader. Moving on to question number 6 from Councillor Johnson to the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Johnson. We are aware that restricting residual waste is effective for increasing recycling rates. It will, however, have an impact on a number of our residents, particularly those who do not currently recycle. Our recent surveys showed an average of 3 black bags being placed out for collection every fortnight across all wards. But it was clear that this figure was affected by some households placing 10 bags or more out for collection. Now, I'd refer Councillor Johnson to the answer I gave to the question to Councillor Gray in relation to awareness raising and educational campaign, as well as our approach to flats. I'd be willing to repeat it all if you want to, but I think you may well have a supplementary question.
Supplementary, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Having listened carefully to the response here, it doesn't require repeating. My particular concern is the as a council member for an urban, dense urban area, then fly tipping is a regular problem. How does the cabinet member anticipate the impact of a restriction on residual waste collection impacting upon our back lanes, on the amount of fly tipping, the amount of work that would have to be done to collect this? Because what I would like, while I think is in favour of recycling, or rather, first of all, would be rather in favour of not using materials at all, then recycling, etc., through the waste hierarchy. I'm particularly concerned about the impact upon our streets and then being made dirtier by people dumping stuff that really should be taken as waste.
You have already published a number of your queries that you raised in the paper. Certainly, awareness is one thing which we're dealing with, as I mentioned earlier. From that side, we will be running a campaign, and I am hoping that all members will assist in trying to convince their electorate to actually participate and recycle. But we certainly cannot continue with a number of black bags which are going, which are being destroyed. Enforcement, we will have to take enforcement. We'll identify where the large numbers of black bags are. We certainly will be able to identify where they're being dumped, if there are black bags being dumped. We are already taking enforcement measures on fly tipping. We no doubt will have to increase our enforcement measures on that, and we won't fail to continue prosecuting people who actually fly tip. But it's really more of gentle persuasion we want to go down, and education and gentle persuasion. We don't want to prosecute people, and that is an absolute final resort. So we look for your assistance and the assistance of other councillors in carrying this forward. But you mentioned in your letter to Jem about the packaging. You're quite right. It's the old adage: reduce, reuse, and recycle, and we fully support that. But we have to reduce our black bag waste, which is currently being used for electricity generation. Increase our recycling, but we know it's a difficult job with the recycling industry obviously being under stress.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Moving on to question number 7 from Councillor Willem to the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport.
Councillor William, the Council has set up an electric vehicles project working group, which is tasked with identifying potential efficiencies to be derived from the implementation of electric vehicles within the Council's own fleet, and also to look at the infrastructure for publicly accessing electric vehicle charging points, identifying the potential grants available for assisting with the funding of such points. While there are grants available up to a maximum of £7,500 per unit, rapid charging points and the associated infrastructure can cost in excess of £20,000 to install. The project team is meeting regularly and is currently progressing with detailed investigations in several areas. This includes reviewing other good practice schemes throughout Wales and work being undertaken on the business case for grant funding. The provision of EV charging in council car parks, as well as council offices, has been discussed in detail at the working group meetings, and relevant officers are tasked with progressing detailed investigations into various options available. We are also currently working in partnership with independent technical consultants on developing a new parking strategy for the county. This strategy will set principles for addressing a number of issues, including the Council's position on the provision of electric vehicle charging points within the Vale. It is anticipated that the work undertaken will also consider the type and level of electric vehicle charging points in specific car parks. In particular, town centre car parks as a potential first phase to ensure the Vale is fully prepared and ready to encourage the ever-increasing use of electric vehicles. It is hoped that the new parking strategy will be agreed by Cabinet early in the new financial year, with a phased implementation of relevant proposals, including electric vehicle charging points, subject to the necessary approvals and delegated authorities.
Moving on to question 8 from Councillor Willem to the Cabinet Member for Learning and Culture.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor William. Thank you for raising this matter. Welsh medium education is a key priority for the Vale of Glamorgan. A great deal of progress has been made in supporting the transition of pupils into Welsh medium education during the current academic year. A system is now in place to allow pupils identified as needing support to attend the Welsh Immersion Centre in Cardiff. These pupils spend up to 12 weeks in the Immersion Centre, whilst remaining registered at a Welsh medium school in the Vale of Glamorgan. In addition to this arrangement, the Director of Learning and Skills has secured grant funding to develop capacity in the Welsh medium sector to support pupils with additional learning needs. This Welsh Government funded 2-year programme will release staff to provide additional support for pupils in schools.
Councillor Will.
Many thanks for the many thanks for the response. There seems to be one part of it missing, which is my main query, which is the timetable for implementing the Welsh Immersion Unit within the Vale. At the moment, as you rightly point out, there are children going into Cardiff. My basic question for you is, how many children are they, and what is the timetable for establishing the unit itself in the Vale? Thank you.
On the vein of the leader, and being absolutely honest, I can't quote you the exact numbers, but I can certainly give you the numbers. It's not financially viable to establish a dedicated immersion unit in the Vale of Glamorgan. The Cardiff Centre is very effective and is able to support referrals from the Vale of Glamorgan at present. Rhondda Cynon Taf is currently developing proposals to establish an immersion unit which would be accessed by Bridgend and Merthyr. If established in due course, it could also be utilised by the Vale of Glamorgan, depending on its location. You will hopefully appreciate the budget position given the scale of inequality that exists between our funding levels and that of other authorities in Wales, as described in my answer earlier to Councillor Marnie. But I'll send you those numbers anyway. Okay.
Question 9 from Councillor Nick Hodges to the Leader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Hodges. The question is on plastic waste pollution, and the Council recognises its responsibility to procure products and services from sustainable sources and is aware of the need to use environmentally conscious products, and in doing so follows the current Welsh Government guidance and principles. The Council's procurement policy and strategy has recently been reviewed and will be presented to Cabinet in March 2018. The document recognises the requirement to adapt to the changing environment, and to quote from the draft, procurement decisions will ensure that regardless of what is bought, the local environment can be safeguarded and also avoid adverse environmental impacts in the supply chain. When purchasing, the Council will make more efficient use of public resources. The Council will strive to meet the challenge of safeguarding and improving both the environment and quality of life without compromising economic growth, whilst recognising the potential conflicting tensions that each may have. The policy is an aspirational document but makes the Council responsible for its environmental effects when procuring goods and services.
Supplementary, Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Leader. I'm grateful for that. Just briefly, though, do you believe that the Vale of Glamorgan Council should take a lead in working to reduce plastic use in the Vale of Glamorgan and encourage our traders, businesses and residents to do the same?
Thank you, Councillor Hodges. I think it would be a good idea for the Vale of Glamorgan Council to take a lead on this, and I'll have a word with the officers and we'll see what we can draw up for the near future. Thank you.
Question 10 is from Ms Collins to the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Planning.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. This question is very similar to a public question that has been received and already answered. However, for completeness, I will reiterate the advice offered in response to the public question. Following an assessment of amended proposals for the Barry gasification plant, Welsh Government is minded to direct that the planning application should be accompanied by an EIA, an environmental impact assessment, and the Council is currently awaiting the outcome of discussion between Welsh Government and the applicant over this requirement. The Welsh Government has advised that it is not currently minded to detail why it has changed its view in this instance, something I find extremely surprising, and the Council awaits further clarification in this regard. At this stage, Welsh Government has invited comments from the applicant prior to issuing a final direction. The environmental impact assessment procedures are governed by Town and Country Planning, Environmental Impact Assessment Wales Regulations 2016, and if required, the applicant for planning permission must provide the required information, so the environmental effects of the development can be assessed and stipulate the way in which information should be presented. Provide for additional advertising and consultation by the applicant, and also require a longer statutory period to determine an application, i.e. 16 weeks instead of 8. The requirement for an EIA does not necessarily mean that any additional environmental information will be required to be submitted to the Council. As is the case in all departments, the authority should consider the environmental impact. However, the regulations do require that this information is provided in a particular format, known as an environmental statement. With regard to the current applications, if Welsh Government direct an EIA is required, the Council will of course require the applicant to undertake this EIA and submit an environmental statement to us. Full consultation period will be carried out with all relevant statutory consultees prior to any recommendation being made to the Planning Committee. Any subsequent report to the Planning Committee will fully detail all the matters, including the environmental impact of the proposals, and it will be for the Planning Committee to make its decision, having full regard to all the relevant material considerations, including national guidance and the policies contained within the LDP.
Supplementary.
Thank you very much for that. I'm also wondering, will the Council be addressing robustly any breaches of planning control that the operator is guilty of, especially in relation to any of the conditions attached to the planning permissions?
It's a very easy one to answer. Yes, we will.
Question 11 is from Councillor Peter King to the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport.
Stage 2 appraisal report, once completed, will include an impact assessment report for the 3 options under consideration, and this will identify any impacts on Dinas Powys and the surrounding communities, and will be provided to Cabinet for consideration in due course.
Supplementary.
Inevitably, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Cabinet Member. Despite some media reports suggesting I'm opposed to the bypass, I'm not. But can I ask if the Cabinet Member agrees that transportation strategy is a multimodal and wider challenge than any one particular scheme in isolation?
Yes, we are recognising that surrounding areas will also be involved, because that was in my first response on that one. But if there was any change of scope at all to the report, and you're aware what the current scope is, that change of any scope would have to be reported to Cabinet, and the Cabinet to approve, and no doubt then scrutiny afterwards.
Thank you. Question 12 from Councillor King to the Member of Neighbourhood Services and Transport.
I think I should have stayed standing. Madam, I would in part refer Councillor King to my early response around awareness raising and education. We would propose to take an educational approach to the proposed recycling waste changes. Prior to commencement, effective marketing and promotion material will be used as part of the communication rollout, and this will be supported by Welsh Government's Waste Resource Action Programme. As the officers involved in this programme have extensive experience of moving councils to source separated recycling collection services across Wales and the UK. Once the service has been rolled out, the recycling crews will apply stickers to bags for service infringements. Initially, officers will assist residents where waste has been left and knock doors and post letters reminding householders of the new arrangements. If this persists, further letters will be distributed with offers of support provided. If certain residents can be identified as not complying with the new arrangements and also failing to engage with us, we would then send a recycling officer to the house for an educational visit where additional literature will be provided, along with any further equipment required and added participation support. In any investigations concerning waste that may have been inappropriately placed out for collection, I think the resident ringing in for more information is a bit ahead of himself. Where are we at? In any investigations concerning waste that may have been inappropriate placed out for collection, we can examine the contents of the bag, and we use address-related waste to assist in resolving any disputes between neighbours. So I hope you'll appreciate we are saying this is not a heavy approach to it. It's one we hope by education. But as a last resort, we may have to consider environmental enforcement, but this would only be when other efforts have failed. And I repeat what I said to Councillor Johnson. We hope that all members will play their part in helping the residents to adapt to the new proposals.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, well, making a quick point that clearly Councillor Johnson and I did not cooperate or collaborate in any way before. The supplementary is raised. Do you feel you have the adequate resources for that education and ultimately enforcement?
We are. You will appreciate that we are going out for consultation on this. We will decide what resources we want following the consultation, and it will be that we may need eventually more enforcement officers in order to ensure that we don't get fly tipping.
Question 13 from Councillor George Carroll to our very popular Councillor Cox.
Councillor Carroll, I took a report to Cabinet on the 19th of February where authority was granted to go out to public consultation on a range of proposals to introduce public space protection orders under the new Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. This consultation will invite comments on specific areas where dog walking and fouling are of concern, and what type of controls could be considered. The orders can make dog fouling and fence in all public places within the Vale of Glamorgan. They require, in identified areas, for a person to be in full control of a dog at all times. They could make it in the fence when out with a dog not to carry dog fouling bags for the disposal of dog feces, and could allow the creation of a dogs on leads areas, ban dogs from marked sports pitches and playgrounds, and on beaches during the bathing season. The outcome of the public consultation exercise will be considered by Cabinet later this year, when a decision will be taken on whether or not to progress with the public space protection orders.
Supplementary, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I thank the Cabinet member for his answer and indeed the Cabinet report that came forward and the measures included within it. Will the Cabinet member assure me that he will robustly use all measures at his disposal to combat dog fouling in the Vale of Glamorgan?
Yes, I can assure the member we will take what action we can on this, because looking at the papers, one of the things of great concern to our members, I think, is the amount of dog fouling that take place. There are a lot of the owners are very responsible and pick up the feces off their dogs, but unfortunately some people don't do this.
Question 14, which is from Councillor Sandra Perks to the Cabinet Member for Regulatory and Legal Services.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is on the biomass site. The cleaning processes that are currently being undertaken on the site are being closely monitored by the planning enforcement team in conjunction with Shared Regulatory Services and Natural Resources Wales. Officers met with the developer and the contractor on site this week, following the concerns raised by the letter that was circulated to local residents. The developer outlined the process and what works were being undertaken on the site to facilitate pre-commissioning work. At this juncture, pre-commissioning work is essentially cleaning. The developer outlined that the purpose of this high-pressure steam cleaning process is to ensure that there are no particles within the various layers and sections of pipework that may interfere with or degrade the turbine prematurely. They walked the site and inspected the buildings and concluded that no part of the plant is currently operational, as this cleaning process is being undertaken in sections through various process sections of pipework in advance of the final turbine stroke generator. Having discussed the matter with colleagues in NRW and the Council's own Shared Regulatory Services, it was considered that these works could not be considered as the site having been brought into beneficial use in terms of planning. It should be noted that site safety will not be a matter for the Council and will be monitored by NRW when the site is operational, having regard to the permit issued by them and by the Health and Safety Executive in respect of construction and site employee operational safety. The environmental permit includes conditions on the commissioning and testing phase, including a requirement that at least 1 month prior to the commencement of commissioning, the operator must provide a written commissioning plan for approval by Natural Resources Wales. Our specialist officers within Shared Regulatory Services have confirmed with Natural Resources Wales that they are content that the pre-operational conditions which were set have been complied with, and they are content that the proposed commissioning plan will provide a high level of environmental protection.
Thank you for that answer. My supplementary is, if the biomass site does go into full operation, will the council be undertaking any monitoring of the pollution levels emitted from the site, in particular around schools and senior residential homes, where these sections of the population are vulnerable to emissions? Would the council commit to having a monitoring equipment on high-risk vulnerable sites so the council and the Vale population can independently monitor pollution levels within the town.
Thank you for that. I wholeheartedly support what you're suggesting should be done, but it would be a matter for the experts that we have in the shared regulatory services to decide on the positions and the points at which such monitoring equipment would be placed. But they are the people that we are relying on as a council. We employ them jointly with Bridgend and Cardiff City, and they are our shared regulatory services people, have the expertise. They're monitoring at the moment, and they would continue to do so. But I would rely on them to decide at which various points that monitoring should take place. Thank you.
Question 15 is from Councillor Burnett to the Cabinet Member for Learning and Culture.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Burnett, for your question. For the period 2017 to 2023, the following investment is planned. Band A of the school's investment programme has a remaining investment of £3.795 million, which consists of £1.794 million Vale funding, £1.705 million Welsh Government funding made up of grant and local government borrowing initiative, and £296,000 Section 106 funding. Band B of the school investment programme has a total investment value for this period of £142.4 million. This consists of Welsh Government funding of £83.8 million, £18.2 million Section 106 funding, and the remaining £40.4 million is made up of capital receipts, reserves and prudential borrowing. This represents a significant level of investment into school buildings and sites in the Vale of Glamorgan. What we need next is a more equitable stability, clarity and relevance from Welsh Government to the way they apply their approach to revenue funding across Wales. I'm sure you agree with me that having shiny new buildings is one thing. We also need to have enough revenue funding to appoint, develop and support our teachers, invest in IT and textbooks and deliver a wide and varied curriculum in our school buildings.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. In the spirit of sharing this newfound honesty that seems to be infecting Cabinet, can I just clarify, therefore, that the much webcams are wonderful things. Much publicised major investment in schools with the Associated Press release talking about the £142 million over the next 7 years failed to say that actually the council's investment, the internal investment, was reduced by about 300,000, and the actual major investment, the increase between the report that we discussed this time last year and the report that we're discussing today is completely down. The increase is completely down to Welsh Government investment and to increase in Section 106. So it would be useful if you did clarify. From my perspective, I can clarify that that conversation with Welsh Government about the school's funding formula was actually commenced by the leader and I in a meeting in Ysgol Derry while we were still in the administration. So.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Can I take that as a statement? And if I may, I'll take a conversation with my officers during the next few days to validate the statements. I haven't got the drill down detail to be able to quantify the statements you're saying. I'll be, as we said, honest, Ron, with you on it at the moment. But I will certainly give you a written response on it to either validate or deny the statement you're making. Is that fair? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Question 16 is from Councillor Burnett to the Cabinet Member for Social Care, Health and Leisure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Burnett. It answers your question on the Penarth Leisure Centre changing rooms upgrade. Completion is currently programmed by the 25th January 2019.
Supplementary.
There is a huge amount of concern from users of the leisure centre that the funding was actually first allocated in a Cabinet report on the 26th of September 2016. So for people not to have upgraded changing rooms, I don't know if you've been in there recently, before 2019 is awful. Particularly when in January, people in Penarth received a leaflet with a Vale of Glamorgan logo on saying, "Coming soon, new changing rooms." Will the Cabinet member be offering a refund of membership forms for people who will be very upset when they find they're not going to get new changing rooms for another year?
I accept that there has been delay in this. If we can look at the reasons for that and the whole process, I agree that with the date you gave when the funding was approved, well, in fact, I think it was, my understanding is, and you'll appreciate I can't answer in any detail for the previous administration, but it was firstly built into the capital programme for 2017-2018. It was then brought forward for the year 2016-2017, so obviously it should have been completed before May of last year. When obviously I was not the Cabinet and the Conservative administration was not in place. I think the problem with this, which I'm assuming the previous administration would have been aware of, was that it was necessary to appoint external consultants because at that time of the lack of officer time and availability in the property department. Just to give you some more information, the actual instructions or the actual appointment of those consultants didn't take place during the year 2016-2017. In fact, they weren't appointed until May of last year, 31st of May for the one consultant, and then for the other it was the 25th of July 2017 before those consultants were appointed. As I've said, the work is scheduled for completion by January of next year. The tenders are due to be returned this coming month, March, and the work is scheduled to start in April, as I say, completion January of next year. I'd like to be a bit more precise and say it's going to be by 3:15 on that date, but I can't really be that precise, unfortunately. I think it's unfortunate there's been delays over this. Some slippage, as I know was criticised earlier on, but I think with respect, the slippage largely occurred during the previous administration, and the work was then, but the consultants should have been appointed, in my view, prior to May of last year. But they weren't. They were appointed after the current administration took office.
Question 17 is from Councillor Morgan to the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Morgan. Could I just say what a pleasure it is to both open and close the question. The answer. The Council has engaged Arcadis Consulting Limited to carry out a well-tagged Stage 2 appraisal of the M4 Junction 34 to A48 highway route. These works include the preparation of an online business case of 4 possible options which have been agreed by the Cabinet. At the end of the well-tagged Stage 2 process, the draft report will determine whether there are any transport options that can address the identified problems and can be delivered, and then select a preferred option to be taken forward to the full business case well-tagged Stage 3. As part of the Stage 1 well-tagged process, members of the public identified a number of issues relating to the traffic congestion on the surrounding roads that directly affect the local communities. Therefore, the consultants are taking that public concern into account when preparing their possible transport solutions, and are seeking to address these concerns as part of the ongoing appraisal work. I very much recognise the importance of consultation, communication and stakeholder engagement in this process. Therefore, there will be stakeholder sessions undertaken once the consultants have prepared draft proposals. This will assist the public in keeping apprised of the recommended solutions and options being recommended to take forward to the WellTech Stage 3. The stakeholder sessions are due to commence next month.
Do you have a supplementary?
No, I'd like to thank Councillor Cox for his very full report, and because he's worked so hard this evening, I won't trouble him with a supplemental question.
Thank you. Can I ask the chief officers to leave us, please, while we go back to 11A? Thank you. 11C, 11A, leader.
Even Tim's going up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be as brief as I can. The senior officers have left the room. This is the 7th edition of the employee pay policy since 2012 and to be published as part of our statutory requirement under the Localism Act 2011. It aims to make public our specific policy on chief officer remuneration, but in addition also makes references to aspects of our pay policy for other groups within the council. The pay policy has been incrementally developed over recent years to reflect Welsh Government guidance, changes in statutory regulations, changes in the council's management structure, national pay awards and the emerging provision of the national living wage. It now reflects the changes we have made over recent months in relation to the removal of the first 2 points of the council's single status Green Book pay structure, as agreed by Cabinet on the 9th of October 2017. And minor changes to the payment arrangements for chief officers as part of the Chief Officer Appraisal Scheme, as agreed by Cabinet on the 13th of December 2017. Members will note at paragraph 10 that there will be additional revisions during the forthcoming year, and specifically to reflect, firstly, the significant changes necessary as a result of the 2018-19 pay negotiations for NJC Green Book employees, and the effect of such negotiations on both the national and local pay spine. Members will be aware that those pay negotiations have not yet been concluded. The impact of the UK Government's Enterprise Act 2016, and specifically in relation to any restrictions on local authority severance payments. And finally, any changes to election payments as a result of the Welsh Government's electoral reform review. Members will clearly be kept informed of the evolving detail of all of the above issues, and any necessary changes will be incorporated within future pay policy statements. This policy was approved by Cabinet and subsequently by Scrutiny Corporate Performance and Resources on the 15th of February, and I move that Council approve the policy.
Second.
All in favour?
Aye.
I have no urgent items for part 1 or part 2, which just leaves me to say, keep warm, safe journey home, and thank you very much.